My name is Eleanor Wright. I'm 32 years old. And I didn't leave my 5-year relationship because we had a fight. I left because in one single moment, the man I love screamed, "Get out!" And I finally understood that he meant my future, not just my body, needed to leave his life. It happened on a night that was supposed to be quiet, ordinary, forgettable. Instead, it became the night everything I thought we were building collapsed in on itself with one sentence. People love to talk about breakups like they're dramatic explosions, screaming matches, tears, thrown objects, final words shouted down hallways. That's not what this was. This was worse. This was a slow, ugly realization, wrapped in silence. We'd just come home from his younger sister's engagement party. She'd been with her boyfriend for 18 months, not even 2 years. And there they were, ring flashing under warm restaurant lights, everyone cheering, hugging, crying, happy tears. I clapped, I smiled, I meant it. On the drive home, the city lights blurred past the windshield, and the car felt too small for all the thoughts pressing against my chest. I didn't plan to say anything heavy. I really didn't. I just said softly, "They seem really happy." He nodded, eyes on the road. And then, before I could stop myself, I added, "It kind of made me think about us." Silence. Not comfortable silence, not thoughtful silence. The kind of silence that tightens your throat. "We've been together a long time," I continued carefully. "Longer than most of our friends who are married now. I think it might be time we talked about where we're going, our timeline, what we're building toward." His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Can we not do this right now?" he said. "When would be a good time?" I asked. "Every time I bring up the future, you shut it down." "I don't want to talk about it," he snapped. "Why not?" My voice shook despite my best efforts. "After 5 years, don't you think I deserve to know where this is going?" That's when everything shifted. "I said I don't want to talk about it," he raised his voice. "God, why do you always have to push? Why can't you just be happy with what we have right now?" "Because what we have feels like it's standing still," I thought. But I didn't say that out loud. I said, "Because I don't want to wake up one day and realize I've been waiting for a future you never planned to give me." He pulled into our apartment complex and slammed the car into park so hard it made me flinch. "You want the truth?" he said. "Fine. I don't know if I want to marry you. I don't know if I want to marry anyone. And honestly, I'm exhausted by you making me feel like there's something wrong with me for not being ready." My chest burned. "Pressuring you?" I whispered. "I've asked about our future maybe 3 or 4 times in 5 years. That's not pressure." "Well, it feels like it," he said. "And I need space. I need you to stop making me feel like I'm failing some kind of relationship test." "I'm not testing you," I said. "I'm asking if you see a future with me." He got out of the car and slammed the door. I followed him inside, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. The apartment felt different the moment we stepped through the door. Smaller, colder, like it already knew what was coming. He turned on me. "You know what?" he said. "Maybe we need a break. Maybe you need to figure out why you're so obsessed with a piece of paper that doesn't even mean anything." "It means something to me," I said quietly. "Then maybe we want different things out of life." "Do we?" I asked. "Because I've been clear about what I want for years. You're the one who keeps avoiding this conversation." And that's when he exploded. "Get out!" The word hit me like a slap. "I can't do this right now," he continued. "I need you to leave. Go stay with your sister or a friend or whoever. I can't even look at you." I stood there. 5 years of shared space, shared routines, shared plans I thought were mutual, reduced to an order. "Okay," I said. He blinked. "What?" "Okay," I repeated. "I'll leave." There it was, the flicker of surprise on his face. Confusion. Because he didn't expect me to agree. He expected tears, begging, apologies, me shrinking myself down until my desire for a future seemed unreasonable again. I didn't give him that. I went to our bedroom and pulled my duffel bag out of the closet. He followed me, anger already fading into something closer to panic. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Leaving," I said, folding clothes with steady hands. "Like you asked." "I didn't mean forever," he said quickly. "I just meant for tonight, so we can cool off." "I know what you meant," I said, "but I'm done." "Done?" he scoffed. "You're breaking up with me over one argument?" "No," I said, finally turning to look at him. "I'm breaking up with you because after 5 years, you can't have a basic conversation about our future without telling me to get out." "That's not one argument," I added. "That's a pattern." He didn't have an answer for that. By the time I zipped the bag, he was crying. I watched him carefully, trying to decide if the tears were real. After 5 years, I still couldn't tell. And that told me everything I needed to know. Before I left, I walked to the kitchen. I opened the drawer where I'd been hiding something for months. A small white box. I placed it on the counter. Next to it, I left a note. 2 words. Dodged a bullet. Then I walked out and didn't look back. That was the night my life split in two. And I didn't know it yet, but his panic hadn't even started. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my sister's couch, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slow, uneven circles, the sound slicing through the quiet like a metronome counting down something I couldn't name yet. My phone buzzed constantly on the coffee table. Calls, missed calls, voicemails I didn't open. At some point near dawn, the screen finally went dark, and the silence felt louder than the noise ever had. That's when the memories started coming in waves. Not the dramatic ones, the small ones. We met 5 years ago at a mutual friend's wedding. I remember that clearly. He'd been standing near the bar, tie loosened, laughing too loudly at something someone said. I remember thinking he looked comfortable in a room full of people, like he belonged anywhere he stood. We talked for hours that night. Nothing earth-shattering, just easy, familiar, like we'd skipped the awkward beginning and landed somewhere solid right away. We started dating a week later, moved in together after 2 years. Shared an apartment, a couch worn into the shape of our bodies, a Netflix account that somehow knew our moods better than we did. From the outside, we looked stable, and for a long time, I believed that was enough. I work as a project coordinator for a mid-sized development firm. It's not glamorous, but it's steady. I like systems, timelines, knowing where things are headed and what it takes to get there. I've always been responsible with money. I started saving for a house down payment 3 years into our relationship, not because he asked, because I believed we were building towards something together. And about 8 months ago, I started saving for something else. Something I never told him about. The ring. It sounds strange, even now, saying that out loud as a woman. But it wasn't impulsive. It wasn't a power move or a test. It was practical, thoughtful, me. He wasn't the type to plan surprises. He got overwhelmed by big gestures. I knew that about him. So I decided, quietly, that when the time felt right, I would ask. Not publicly, not extravagantly, just honestly. I saved every extra dollar, skipped trips, cut back on little indulgences. The ring cost $6,200, a princess-cut diamond set in a simple white gold band. Nothing flashy, because he always said he didn't like flashy things. I asked his friends subtle questions, looked at the pieces he lingered on when we walked past jewelry stores, paid attention. I thought that was what love was supposed to look like. Attentive, patient, intentional. But even then, there were signs. Little ones I brushed aside. Whenever marriage came up in group settings, friends talking about weddings, engagements, future plans, he'd make a joke. Sounds expensive. Couldn't be me. Or he'd suddenly need another drink. Change the subject. I told myself he was private. Not everyone likes discussing milestones publicly, right? I respected that. Or at least I told myself I did. Looking back, I see how often I made excuses for his silence, how I translated avoidance into complexity, how I convinced myself that loving someone meant waiting quietly while they figured themselves out, no matter how long that took. 5 years sounds like a long time when you say it out loud, but when you're living it day by day, it sneaks up on you. And a year becomes not yet. 2 years becomes soon. 5 years becomes the question you're no longer allowed to ask. That night at his sister's engagement party, watching everyone cheer for a future being celebrated openly, something inside me cracked. Not loudly. Just enough. I didn't want pressure. I didn't want ultimatums. I wanted clarity. And somehow, asking for clarity made me the enemy. By morning, I had listened to one voicemail. Just one. His voice was shaky, apologetic, confused. I didn't mean it like that, he said. You know I didn't mean for you to leave. We just needed space. Space. The word felt hollow now. Because what he'd really asked for was time without accountability. And I'd finally stopped offering it. I turned my phone face down. I didn't know what would happen next. I only knew one thing with terrifying certainty. If I went back now, nothing would ever change. I went back to the apartment on Saturday. Not to see him, to retrieve the pieces of my life I'd left behind. I timed it carefully. He'd texted earlier in the week saying he'd be out all afternoon. I didn't respond, but I memorized the window anyway. Walking up to the building felt surreal, like visiting a place I used to live in a dream. The hallway smelled the same, cleaner and old carpet. The elevator mirror still showed my reflection in a way that made me look smaller than I felt. When I unlocked the door, the apartment was silent. Too silent. The first thing I noticed was that nothing had moved. The couch pillows were exactly where I'd left them. My mug was still in the sink. The throw blanket draped over the armrest like it was waiting for me to sit back down and pretend none of this had happened. And there, on the kitchen counter, was the ring. Still in its box. Still sitting next to my note. Dodged a bullet. I stared at it longer than I meant to, not because I regretted leaving it, but because I finally understood what it represented. It wasn't just a proposal. It was 5 years of patience, of hoping, of swallowing my own needs so he wouldn't feel pressured. It was proof that I'd been planning a future with someone who couldn't even stand to talk about one. I packed quietly. Clothes, shoes, books I loved more than I realized. Small things that carried weight when lifted one by one. Halfway through, my phone buzzed. A text. What is that ring? Is that real? Were you actually going to propose to me? 3 messages, sent minutes apart. I didn't reply. What was there to say? Yes, I was planning to ask you to commit to a future you openly told me you didn't know if you wanted. That wasn't a conversation worth having anymore. As I moved through the apartment, memories tried to ambush me. The spot on the floor where we danced drunk after a wedding. The counter where he used to sit and talk while I cooked. The bedroom where we'd whispered plans late at night, plans that always stayed vague when it came to anything permanent. At the time, I thought we were being flexible. Now I saw it for what it was. Avoidance dressed up as patience. I found the sock drawer where I'd hidden the ring all those months. Empty now. I felt a strange sense of relief, like I'd reclaimed something that never should have been waiting there in the first place. That afternoon, I took my things to my brother's house. He didn't ask many questions, just handed me a spare key and told me to take the guest room as long as I needed. Later, over takeout, I finally told him everything. The engagement party, the drive home, the screaming, the order to leave. He listened without interrupting. Then he said something that stuck with me. I always hated the way he talked to you in front of people, he said, like you were overreacting just for existing. I laughed softly, not because it was funny, because it was true. And I'd normalized it. Over the next few weeks, the messages kept coming. From him, from mutual friends, from people who suddenly had opinions about my relationship now that it was over. He's devastated. You blindsided him. 5 years is a long time to throw away over one argument. I didn't respond, because it wasn't one argument. It was years of unanswered questions. 3 months passed. I moved into my own apartment. Smaller, quieter, mine. The ring stayed in a drawer at my brother's house. I didn't know what to do with it yet. Sell it, return it, let it sit there as a reminder of what waiting too long costs. I figured I'd decide eventually. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have predicted, was that my silence wasn't bringing him peace. It was driving him toward panic. And soon, he was going to find out that I hadn't just moved on. I'd move forward. I didn't go looking for love. That part matters. I wasn't scrolling dating apps at midnight, trying to prove a point. I wasn't posting thirst traps or carefully curated I'm thriving photos to get his attention. I was rebuilding my life quietly, learning the rhythm of my own apartment, drinking coffee on my balcony in the mornings, letting the silence feel like peace instead of loneliness. And then, 6 weeks after the breakup, Daniel messaged me. We'd known each other in college, not intimately, not dramatically, just enough to remember how easy conversation had been. He said he'd seen my relationship status change and wanted to check in. No expectations, no pressure. We met for coffee. 3 hours later, the barista had asked us twice if we wanted refills. It was different from the beginning. Not fireworks. Clarity. He asked questions and actually waited for the answers. He didn't deflect when I talked about my past. He didn't joke it away or change the subject when conversations edged toward the future. On our 3rd date, he said casually, "I'm not dating for fun. I want a partner, eventually a family. If that's not what you want, that's okay, but I don't want to pretend." I remember staring at him, stunned. Not because he was proposing, but because he wasn't afraid to say the word eventually out loud. We took things slowly, even though everything felt easy. 2 months later, we were spending most weekends together. I told him about the ring, the one I'd bought, the one I never used. He didn't flinch. He didn't feel threatened. He just said, "That tells me how seriously you take commitment." A week later, at a small dinner with just the 2 of us, he asked me to marry him. No speeches, no audience, just honesty. I said yes before he finished asking. I didn't post the announcement right away. We took a few days just for ourselves. But when I finally shared it online, I didn't think about who might see it. I should have. Within hours, my phone started lighting up. Messages from people I hadn't spoken to in months. And then, a text from him. "Are you serious right now? You're engaged after 3 months?" I didn't reply. Then came messages from his friends. "This is cruel. You're clearly doing this to hurt him. He found the ring. He knows you were going to propose to him." The implication was clear. I was the villain now. What they didn't know was that I hadn't given Daniel that ring. I'd bought him his own. Different stone, different style, a clean beginning. The old ring stayed in a drawer, untouched. The calls escalated. From his number, unknown numbers, mutual friends playing messenger. He told people I'd blindsided him, that he didn't know things were that serious, that I'd thrown away 5 years over one argument. Funny how quickly history can be rewritten when panic sets in. I still didn't respond. I was happy, genuinely. And I wasn't willing to shrink that happiness to make someone else feel better about losing control. What I didn't realize was that he wasn't done trying to reach me. Not even close. The first time he showed up, I wasn't there. I found out later, from my sister-in-law. She called me mid-morning, her voice tight. "Your ex just came by the house," she said. "He was ringing the doorbell like something was wrong." My stomach dropped. I hadn't lived there for over a month. "He kept asking where you were," she continued. "I told him you didn't live here anymore. He asked for your new address." "And?" I asked. I told him it wasn't my place to share that. There was a pause. "Then he got angry," she said. "Like, uncomfortably angry. He accused me of hiding you, used the word harboring." Harboring. Like I was something stolen, or dangerous, or still his. She told him to leave, or she'd call the police. He eventually did, but not before saying, "I'll find her eventually." That sentence sat heavy in my chest for the rest of the day. The next time he found me, not at my apartment, at a restaurant, I was having dinner with Daniel and 2 friends from college. Laughing, relaxed, the kind of normal evening that had felt impossible just months earlier. I noticed the shift in the room before I saw him. That subtle hush, heads turning, the feeling that something had entered the space that didn't belong. Then I saw him, standing near the entrance, eyes already locked on me. He walked straight toward our table. "So this is her," he said, stopping just short of us. "This is the woman you threw 5 years away for." I stood up immediately. "You need to leave," I said. "I need answers," he snapped. "I need to understand how you could move on this fast." "I didn't cheat," I said evenly, "if that's what you're implying." "Then what is this?" he demanded. 3 months and you're engaged? That's not normal." Daniel stayed seated, calm but alert. "I think you should go," he said. "This isn't appropriate." My ex turned toward him like he'd been insulted. "I'm talking to my girlfriend." "Ex-girlfriend," I corrected. "As of 3 months ago, when you told me to get out for asking about marriage." "I didn't scream," he said quickly. "I was upset. There's a difference." "You told me to leave," I said. "I left. I don't know what else you expected." "I expected you to come back," he shot back. "I expected you to cool off and realize you overreacted." "And apologize," I added. He didn't deny it. The restaurant was watching now. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "You ran off and proposed to the first man who showed you attention," my ex continued. "This is a rebound. You're going to regret it." I looked at him and felt something unexpected. Nothing. No anger, no guilt. Just distance. "The man you dated waited 5 years for you to decide if you wanted a future," I said quietly. "That man doesn't exist anymore." He stared at me like I'd hit him. Then he laughed. A sharp, hollow sound. "You've changed," he said. "You're cold now." "No," I said. "I'm done." He left after that, but not before turning to our friends and saying I was emotionally abusive and that Daniel should be careful. Daniel reached for my hand under the table. "I trust you," he said softly, "and that behavior told me everything I need to know." I wanted to believe it was over. It wasn't. After the restaurant incident, something in him shifted. It wasn't grief anymore. It was strategy. The messages stopped coming directly to me. Instead, they started landing everywhere else. My mother called first. Her voice was hesitant, careful, like she was stepping into a room where something fragile might shatter. "He called me," she said. "He was crying, said he didn't understand what happened, that you just left." I closed my eyes. "He told me," she continued, "that he never knew things were that serious, that you never actually proposed, that you just left a ring on the counter and walked out without trying to talk." "That part is technically true," I said, "because he screamed at me to get out when I tried to talk." There was a long pause. Then my mom sighed. "He said you were pressuring him constantly." "Mom," I said quietly, "I asked about our future after 5 years together." Silence. Then, "That's not pressure." No, it wasn't. It was adult communication. He didn't stop with my parents. He reached out to my brother again, a cousin I barely speak to. Even my grandmother, who is 72 years old and still believes relationships should be built on patience and respect. He told each of them a version of the story where he was confused, blindsided, abandoned, where I was impulsive, emotional, unreasonable. Watching someone rewrite history in real time is a strange thing, especially when you lived every moment they're now denying. Then he found Daniel. Not in person. Online. He sent him a long message, paragraphs carefully written to sound concerned, reasonable, almost kind. I think you deserve to know who you're getting involved with. She makes big life decisions without discussing them. She leaves the second things get hard. She did the same thing to me. Daniel showed it to me without hesitation. We read it together. Then we laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so transparently desperate. She asked me about marriage for 5 years, I said. I avoided it. But now she's impulsive? Daniel blocked him. I followed suit, or at least I tried. The next escalation came where I didn't expect it. My workplace. He called the main office and asked to speak with me about a personal legal matter. When the receptionist told him I was unavailable, he left a message implying we had shared assets and unresolved financial issues. We didn't. Our lease had always been in his name. Our finances were completely separate. I owed him nothing. But suddenly, HR was calling me into a meeting. I had to explain carefully that I was being harassed by an ex who refused to accept the end of our relationship. They were understanding, but embarrassed and exhausted, just like me. I still didn't respond to him, because responding would give him what he wanted. Engagement. Proof that he still mattered enough to disrupt my life. But silence doesn't always calm people. Sometimes it makes them louder, more reckless. And soon I was going to find out just how far he was willing to go to make himself the victim. The invitation wasn't sent to me. That was the first red flag. He called it a casual get-together. A few drinks, some familiar faces, nothing serious. But one of the people he invited was still more loyal to me than to him. And that's how I found out. My phone buzzed around 6 that evening. A text from Mark, one of our mutual friends, the kind who listens more than he talks. Hey, just a heads up. He invited a bunch of us over tonight. Pretty sure he's trying to get everyone officially on his side. Thought you should know. I stared at the message for a long moment. I wasn't angry. I wasn't scared. I was tired. Let him talk, I replied. The truth has a way of showing up. I didn't realize how quickly it would. According to Mark, the night was less get-together and more trial. He poured drinks, put on music, acted casual. Then, slowly, deliberately, he started telling his version of what happened. How I was emotionally unavailable. How I was obsessed with marriage to an unhealthy degree. How I abandoned him without warning. How I flaunted my new engagement to hurt him. And finally, his favorite piece of evidence, the ring. He showed them photos, the box on the counter, the note, talked about how cruel it was, how traumatizing it had been to discover I'd been planning to propose while also walking out on him. What he didn't say, what he carefully avoided, was the part where he told me to leave. Mark waited. So did the others. Then he asked calmly, why did she leave that night? My ex shrugged. We had a disagreement about timing. She overreacted. Did you tell her to get out? Mark asked. There was a pause. Not seriously, my ex said. I was upset. That's when someone else spoke up. Lena, another friend. Someone who'd known us both for years. Do you remember my birthday dinner last year? She asked the group. When someone asked you about marriage? My ex stiffened. You said, and I remember this clearly, I honestly don't know if I ever want to get married. I don't see the point of it. The room went quiet. My ex laughed nervously. I was joking. I was going through something. But the damage was already done. People started asking questions. Real ones. So why act blindsided? Why tell everyone she pressured you? Why scream at her to leave if you weren't serious? He didn't have answers. Just excuses. The gathering ended early. Not dramatically. Awkwardly. Mark texted me later with a full breakdown. I think he thought we'd all rally behind him. It kind of backfired. Most people left confused. One person even said maybe you were right to leave. I put my phone down and felt something loosen in my chest. Not victory. Relief. Because the truth no longer needed me to defend it. The next message from him came 3 days later. Not angry. Not accusing. Different. Long. Carefully written. He said he'd been thinking, reflecting, that he knew he'd handled things badly, that he hadn't meant for me to leave permanently. He blamed his fear of commitment, his parents' divorce, unresolved trauma. He said he was finally ready to talk, finally ready to try. He asked if there was any chance we could start over. I didn't respond right away, not because I was tempted, but because I wanted to choose my words carefully. Because some doors don't close on their own. You have to shut them. And I was finally ready to do that. I waited 2 days before replying. Not because I needed time to consider his offer. I knew my answer the moment I finished reading his message. But I needed time to decide how much of myself I was willing to give to a conversation that no longer belonged to my life. Because closure isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you choose. I reread his email once more before responding. The tone was softer, sadder, almost humble. He said he'd been afraid of commitment because of his parents' divorce, that watching their marriage fall apart had left scars he never dealt with properly. He said he'd been working through it internally, that he didn't mean for me to leave forever, that he was finally ready to have the honest conversation I'd been asking for, that he was willing to go to therapy, to work on his fears, to genuinely try. He asked if there was any chance we could start over. 5 years. It took 5 years and losing me for him to suddenly find clarity. I typed my response slowly, deliberately. I appreciate you sharing all of this with me. I understand you're hurting, and I understand that commitment can be genuinely scary. I paused, then continued. But you had 5 years to have this conversation with me honestly. Instead, you avoided it, deflected it, dismissed it, and when I finally asked directly, you screamed at me to leave. My hands were steady as I typed the next part. I can't build a future with someone who only wants to work on things after I've already walked away. I took a breath. I'm engaged now. I'm genuinely happy. I wish you well, but there's nothing to go back to between us. And finally, please stop contacting me, my family, and my fiancé. This is the last message I'll respond to. I hit send. Then I blocked him. Everywhere. His number, his email, every social media account I could find. When I put my phone down, I expected to feel something dramatic. Relief. Sadness. Triumph. What I felt instead was quiet. A deep, settled quiet. 5 days passed. Then 10. No calls, no messages, no indirect attempts through friends or family. The silence this time wasn't empty. It was peaceful. Daniel and I started wedding planning, not in a rush, but with excitement. My family adored him. His family welcomed me without hesitation. Everything felt aligned, in a way it never quite had before. The ring, the old one, was still in a drawer at my brother's house. I picked it up a week later and turned it over in my hand. 5 years of waiting, 8 months of saving, a future that never existed. I sold it the next day. The money went straight into our wedding fund. It felt like closing a loop. I'm not going to pretend the last few months weren't chaotic. They were exhausting, emotionally draining. Finding out your long-term relationship can implode over one honest conversation is jarring. Realizing how much you've been settling for is painful. Watching someone rewrite history to make themselves the victim is infuriating. But I learned something through all of it. When someone shows you who they are, especially when they're under pressure, believe them. The first time. He showed me for years that he couldn't talk about the future without shutting down or deflecting. I kept hoping he'd change. He didn't. And when I finally stopped waiting, he acted like I was the problem. I'm done with that. Some people will say I moved on too fast. Some will say leaving the ring was cruel. Some will say I should have given him more time to figure himself out. But I gave 5 years. That was more than enough. Sometimes the best revenge isn't spite. It's peace. It's strange how endings rarely feel like endings when you're inside them. There was no dramatic final confrontation after that email, no last voicemail, no unexpected knock at the door. Just quiet, the kind that lets you hear yourself think again. Daniel and I took our time after that, not because we were unsure, but because we finally could. We toured venues without rushing, argued playfully over flowers, laughed about seating charts like it was the most serious problem in the world. My family noticed the difference before I did. My sister told me one night, "You're lighter. You don't apologize before you speak anymore." She was right. I hadn't realized how often I'd been shrinking myself, softening sentences, cushioning opinions, bracing for irritation that never should have been there in the first place. Every once in a while, someone would bring him up, carefully, like his name was a fragile object that might shatter if said too loudly. "Have you heard anything? Is he doing okay? Do you ever wonder if—" I didn't. Not anymore. Because wondering implies unfinished business. And there wasn't any. The last tangible piece of that relationship, the ring, was gone now. Sold. Transformed from a symbol of waiting into something forward-facing. When I transferred the money into our wedding fund, I didn't feel bitter. I felt clean. Like I'd finally returned something that was never meant to stay with me. I don't hate him. That surprises people. They expect anger, or resentment, or at least a sharp edge to the way I talk about him. But hatred requires investment, and I've already invested enough. What I feel instead is clarity, and clarity has a way of stripping away illusion without cruelty. Here's what I know now. Someone doesn't have to be evil to be wrong for you. They don't have to cheat or lie or betray you in obvious ways. Sometimes they just don't want the same future. And instead of admitting that honestly, they keep you suspended, hoping you'll stop asking, waiting quietly. Forever if you let them. I asked one question in 5 years. Just one. And the answer I got wasn't confusion. It was anger. That told me everything. If there's a lesson here, if there has to be one, it's this. Don't confuse patience with love. Don't confuse silence with safety. And don't wait for someone to be ready when they benefit from you staying exactly where you are. Because when someone shows you who they are under pressure, believe them. The first time. My name is Alina Hart. I'm 29. And the night I finally understood how little respect can exist inside a relationship that still calls itself love. I was sitting alone in my car, staring through a restaurant window. Inside, my fiancé was laughing. Not the warm kind. Not the kind you save for someone you're excited to see. He was leaning back in a booth, one arm draped over the seat, drink in his hand, holding his phone up for the table like it was entertainment. I knew exactly what he was showing them. My text. "Where are you? This is our anniversary dinner." He was an hour and 40 minutes late. The table erupted again. Short, sharp laughs. One of his friends slapped the table. Another leaned in closer, eyes bright with that mean curiosity people get when they're watching someone else be humiliated. My chest tightened. This wasn't new. 3 years together, 1 year engaged. At some point, respect had become optional for him, something he offered only when it cost him nothing. I checked my phone again. No message, no explanation, nothing. This morning, he'd been glued to me, asking what time I'd leave work, telling me not to be late, acting like tonight mattered. But now? Now my existence was a punchline. I sat there for a few seconds longer than I should have, long enough to feel stupid, long enough to feel small. Then I opened the car door. The restaurant was warm and loud, filled with clinking glasses and overlapping conversations. For a brief moment, I envied everyone who wasn't walking toward a table where they didn't belong anymore. When my fiancé saw me, the laughter died instantly. His smile didn't vanish. It tightened. Annoyance flashed across his face before he masked it with a casual shrug. "Hey," I said, "you missed our anniversary dinner." He rolled his eyes, slow and deliberate, like he was already tired of me. "Don't be dramatic, Alina," he said. "We can eat any night." One of his friends snorted. "Damn, someone's in trouble." Another added, smirking, "Relax, she'll get over it. She always does." My fiancé leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low and sharp, meant only for me. "Babe, you're embarrassing me," he said. "Just go home. I'll be there later." The word babe landed like an order. I didn't move. "We need to talk," I said. "Now." His jaw tightened. He exhaled through his nose, irritation clear. "Oh my God," he muttered. He stood, turning to his friends with a half smile, like he was apologizing to them. "Hold my seat." He brushed past me toward the door, not waiting to see if I followed. Outside, the air was colder. He crossed his arms, weight shifting back on his heels. Defensive, closed off. "What's your problem?" he asked. "It's not just dinner," I said. "It's our anniversary. It's you being almost 2 hours late. It's you laughing about it with your friends." He scoffed. "You're being sensitive." There it was, the same line, every time. "This is why I need space sometimes," he continued, voice hardening. "You're suffocating. You make everything into a thing." Something in me went very still. "I'm done," I said. "This relationship is over." For a split second, he froze. Then his mouth twitched, like he thought I was bluffing. "You're not serious." "I am," I said. "I'll move my stuff out this weekend." He stepped closer, not touching me, but close enough to invade my space. His shoulders squared, his eyes sharpened. "You'll regret it if you ever leave," he said quietly. Not pleading, not emotional. A threat delivered with confidence. "You have no idea what you're throwing away," he added. "No one else will put up with you like I do." My pulse thudded in my ears, but my voice stayed even. "We'll see." His brow furrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means we'll see." I stepped past him before he could say anything else. "Enjoy your drinks." I didn't look back. He didn't know, couldn't know, that I'd already stopped waiting for him to change. My fiancé lived in my apartment. His name wasn't on the lease. He'd moved in slowly. A bag here, clothes in my closet, his things replacing mine inch by inch. He didn't pay rent, said he was saving for our future. My office had become storage for his stuff. My space had shrunk to accommodate his comfort. And while he'd been getting louder, more dismissive, more certain I'd never leave, I'd been quietly making plans. That night, he came home around 3 a.m. I felt the mattress shift as he lay down. "Alina," he whispered, "you awake?" I didn't answer. "I'm sorry about earlier," he said. "We'll talk tomorrow." I stayed still. I'd heard that apology before. Always calm, always empty. Friday morning, he acted like nothing happened. He made breakfast, hummed, kissed my cheek. "So," he said, casual, "what time's our makeup dinner tonight?" "There isn't one," I said. "We're done." He laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Come on, don't start." I'm packing this weekend, I said. You should find another place. That was when the mask dropped. You're not dumping me, he said flatly, and I'm not leaving. He leaned closer, voice low and controlled. Try to kick me out. I'll make your life hell. I nodded once. Okay. That threw him off. Okay, he repeated. I have to get to work, I said. He turned away, slammed the bedroom door hard enough to rattle the walls. I stood there for a moment, then picked up my phone and texted my brother. Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Truck's ready. Because he thought fear would keep me. He thought his warning would make me stay. He didn't know I'd already accepted a job in another state. Didn't know this weekend was the end. He said I'd regret leaving. He was wrong. He just didn't know it yet. People like to believe disrespect arrives loudly. Screaming matches, slammed doors, obvious betrayals. But with Damien, it didn't start that way. It crept in quietly, disguised as comfort. 3 years together, 1 year engaged. If you'd asked me early on, I would have said we were solid. Not perfect, but real. He was confident, charming in a blunt, masculine way, decisive, protective when it suited him. I mistook that for stability. The shift was gradual enough that I didn't mark a single day and think, this is when it went wrong. It was more like erosion. Damien didn't officially move in. He just stayed. A weekend bag that never left. A drawer he borrowed in my dresser. Shoes by the door that multiplied. A jacket on the back of my chair that became permanent. When I brought it up, he smiled like I was being cute. Why are you overthinking this? He said. We're getting married. That word, married, did a lot of heavy lifting. He wasn't on the lease. He didn't pay rent. He said he was saving for our future. I believed him. At first, it felt normal to adjust. Relationships are compromise, right? My office became a storage room for his boxes. Temporary, he said. My gaming console got pushed into a corner so he could set up his workstation. My closet space shrank until I was rotating clothes seasonally, like I lived in a studio. None of it was dramatic enough to fight over, and Damien was good at that. Never crossing lines loudly, just stepping over them quietly and acting surprised when I noticed. When he started showing up late, it came with excuses. Traffic, work ran long, lost track of time. When he canceled plans, it was always last minute and always followed by a casual, "You're flexible, right?" When he teased me in front of his friends, he called it joking. "You're too serious," he'd say, grinning while they laughed. "Relax, I'm kidding." If I didn't laugh along, he'd sigh. "You're exhausting when you do this." That word again, exhausting. Somehow I was always the problem, for noticing, for remembering dates, for expecting follow-through, for wanting to matter when other people were watching. The first time I tried to talk to him about respect, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't get emotional. He leaned back, arms crossed, jaw tight. "You're reading into things," he said. "You create problems where there aren't any." And because he sounded so sure, I doubted myself. I told myself this was what long-term relationships look like. Less romance, more realism. But realism shouldn't feel like shrinking. The worst part wasn't even the lateness or the jokes. It was the certainty. Damien behaved like someone who already knew the ending, like I was locked in. When I mentioned boundaries, space, time, consideration, he'd nod without committing. "Yeah, sure," he'd say, "we'll work on it." But nothing changed. I started noticing patterns. If his friends were involved, I came last. If it was between my feelings and his convenience, convenience won. If I pushed back too hard, he withdrew, cold, silent, and controlled. Not dramatic, just distant enough to punish. I didn't realize how much of myself I was adjusting until one night I stood in my own kitchen and felt like a guest. That should have scared me more than it did. What Damien didn't know, what he never bothered to ask, was that while he was getting comfortable, I was watching. Not angrily, carefully. I'd started documenting things in my head, not to use against him, but to understand whether this was fixable. I asked myself quiet questions. If nothing changed, could I live like this? If I stopped initiating, would anything remain? If I left, what would I actually be losing? Around that time, an email landed in my inbox. A recruiter, a position I'd applied for months earlier and forgotten about. Remote role, strong salary, office-based in another state with occasional visits. I didn't tell Damien, not because I was hiding, but because I already knew what he'd say. That's inconvenient. That's bad timing. Why would you even consider that? I told myself I'd bring it up after our anniversary, after our check-in dinner, after one night where he showed up on time and treated me like a priority instead of an obligation. That dinner was supposed to be my answer. I didn't go into that restaurant hoping for a miracle. I went hoping for effort, for eye contact, for accountability, for something solid enough to stand on. Instead, I got laughter, mockery, and a threat disguised as confidence. You'll regret it if you ever leave. When he said it, I realized something with terrifying clarity. Damien didn't believe I had options. He believed endurance was the same as loyalty, and he believed fear would keep me. That night, long before the trucks arrived, long before he slammed doors and made threats, I had already crossed an invisible line. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning relief. And once that switch flipped, there was no going back. Because erosion works both ways. And by the time Damien noticed what was happening, there wasn't much left for him to stand on. When Damien came home that night, it was close to 3 a.m. I didn't turn toward him when the door opened. I didn't shift when the mattress dipped. I stayed still, breathing slow and even, staring into the dark like sleep had already claimed me. He stood there for a moment longer than necessary. I could feel it. The pause, the calculation. "Alina," he whispered. Silence. "I'm sorry about earlier," he said quietly. "We'll talk tomorrow." The apology was measured, controlled, not emotional. It was the same tone he used when he wanted something reset without taking responsibility for it. I didn't respond. After a beat, he lay down, careful not to make noise, as if restraint itself should count for something. I fell asleep thinking about how familiar that pattern felt. Friday morning, he acted like nothing had happened. He was already up when I walked into the kitchen. Coffee brewing, eggs in a pan, music playing low from his phone, something upbeat, something falsely normal. "Morning," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I didn't flinch, but I didn't lean in either. "So," he added casually, sliding a plate toward me, "what time's our makeup dinner tonight?" There it was, the assumption. "There isn't one," I said. He froze, spatula hovering over the stove. "What?" "We're done," I said. "I meant it last night." He laughed, a short, dismissive sound, like I'd told him a bad joke. "Come on," he said. "Don't do this." "When did you apologize?" I asked. He frowned. "I just did." "No," I said, "last night." "I said sorry," he replied. "You were asleep, but still." I looked at him then, really looked. No guilt, no concern, just irritation that his reset button hadn't worked. "I'm packing this weekend," I said. "You should find somewhere else to stay." That was when his expression hardened. "You're not dumping me," he said flatly, "and I'm not leaving." There was no pleading in his voice, no desperation, just certainty. "Try to kick me out," he added. "I'll make your life hell." I nodded once. "Okay." That single word threw him. "Okay?" he repeated. "I have to get to work," I said, grabbing my keys. "We'll talk later." He didn't follow me out. He turned away instead, jaw tight, and slammed the bedroom door hard enough to rattle the frame. If Damien thought intimidation would work, he adjusted tactics fast. By Friday evening, the love bombing began. I came home to the smell of food, real food, not takeout. He'd cooked an elaborate dinner, set the table properly, even lit a candle. He'd changed too, wearing the button-down I'd bought him last year, hairstyled, clean shave, presentation perfect. He smiled like we were rewinding time. "Thought we could have a quiet night," he said. "Just us." I didn't sit down. "Remember our trip last summer?" he continued, pulling out a chair. "We were good then, really good." I remembered it clearly. The way he spent most of the trip glued to his phone, the complaints about the hotel, the comments about how the restaurant choices weren't his vibe. "That trip where you complained the whole time?" I asked. He waved it off. "I get cranky when I travel, you know that." Then, softer. "But the good parts mattered. They still do." He reached for my arm. I stepped back. "I'm tired," I said. "I'm going to bed." He checked the time. "It's 9. Long day tomorrow." He followed me down the hallway. "You're really going to throw away 3 years over one dinner?" he asked. "It's not one dinner," I said. "It's a pattern." He stopped in the doorway. "You'll never find someone like me." I met his eyes. "That's the point." He slept on the couch that night. Not because he was hurt, because withholding himself was his version of punishment. It made things easier. Saturday morning, 6 a.m., my phone buzzed. Outside. I was already dressed. My brother's truck pulled up, headlights cutting through the early morning dark. 2 of his friends climbed out. All business. No questions. Everything important had already been packed during the week. Clothes, electronics, documents, loaded into my car. Now came the rest. The furniture that had been mine before Damien slowly replaced it with his preferences. My desk, my shelves, my gaming setup he'd pushed aside. We worked fast, quiet, efficient. At 7:30, Damien stumbled out of the bedroom in sweatpants, confusion written all over his face. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. "I'm moving out," I said. "You can't just, this is my home too." It's my apartment, I replied. My name's on the lease. He stepped in front of the door, blocking one of the guys carrying a box. Stop, he snapped. We need to talk. My brother's voice was calm. Sir, please move. Don't sir me, Damien said sharply. Then, turning to me, Alina, tell them to stop. We're almost done, I said. You should probably get dressed. He stared at me like he didn't recognize the person in front of him. Then he spun around and disappeared back inside, already yelling into his phone. By 9 a.m., everything that belonged to me was gone. The apartment looked wrong without it, like a set missing half its props. Damien stood there, dressed now, hands on his hips. Where are you even going? He demanded. You can't afford another place. You need me. I looked at him. I got a new job, I said. Different state. I start Monday. His jaw dropped. When were you going to tell me? I wasn't, I said. We're broken up. He scoffed. You planned this behind my back. I handed him an envelope. Lease ends in 2 months, I said. Landlord's number is in there if you want to take it over. He stared at it like it was an insult. This is insane, he said. When this job falls apart, when you're alone, don't come crying to me. I won't. And with that, I walked out. He thought he'd scared me into staying. He didn't realize the decision had already been made. The drive out of the city felt unreal. No shouting, no dramatic goodbye, no desperate chase. Just distance stretching out in front of me. Somewhere after the state line, my shoulders finally relaxed. Not because I'd won anything, but because the tension I'd been carrying had nowhere left to live. Monday came quickly. The new job was everything Damien used to dismiss as not that important. Clear expectations, direct communication, people who showed up when they said they would. Respect wasn't something you had to earn there. I found a small apartment 20 minutes from the office. Clean, quiet, empty, in the best way. Every square foot felt intentional. The first night, I sat on the floor eating takeout, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. No raised voices, no slammed doors, no bracing for disappointment. Peace wasn't loud. It was steady. That peace lasted 4 days. On Friday morning, Damien found my LinkedIn. The first message was neutral. Careful. Hope you're settling in. Been thinking about everything. I didn't reply. 2 days later, we should talk. Ending things like this wasn't fair. Still nothing. By midweek, the tone shifted. Ignoring me doesn't make you strong. It just proves you don't care. I blocked him. Another account appeared. Blocked again. Then he called my mother. She rang me that evening, voice tense. Alina, she said, what happened between you and Damien? I ended the relationship, I replied evenly. He says you left him when he needed you, she said, that you chose work over him. I closed my eyes for a moment. He chose not to work, I said. That wasn't my decision. He's struggling, she insisted. He doesn't have a place lined up. He lived in my apartment rent-free, I said. That wasn't temporary hardship, that was entitlement. She didn't answer right away. I didn't mention that Damien had quit his job 6 months earlier, that there had been no wedding date, no venue, no real plan, just assumptions that I would keep carrying the weight. The next call came from my old landlord. Ms. Hart, he said, your former partner is creating confusion. My stomach tightened. How so? He's telling people you still live there, the landlord explained. He ordered food under your name. When the delivery driver asked for you, he claimed you were unavailable. That wasn't careless. That was calculated. If it happens again, the landlord added, we'll need to involve authorities. I thanked him and hung up, already logging into my accounts. That night, purchase alerts hit my phone one after another. Amazon. Multiple items. High totals. I opened the app. $300 in pending orders. Clothes, shoes, electronics. Damien still had access, left over from when he'd handled household orders. I canceled everything, changed every password, removed all payment methods. An hour later, my phone rang from an unfamiliar number. I didn't answer. The voicemail came through immediately. What did you do? Damien's voice snapped. You canceled everything. He called again, this time from a friend's phone. You can't just cut me off, he said the moment I picked up, after everything I gave you. For example, I asked. My time, he said, my commitment. You lived rent-free, I replied. You quit your job. You skipped plans. You disrespected me. I was counting on us, he shot back. You just walked away. Don't contact me again, I said. If you do, I'll document it. He hung up without another word. 2 days later, my brother sent screenshots. Damien had posted on Facebook. Photos of my old apartment, half empty now, stripped of the things that had balanced it. The caption read, when you give everything to someone and they walk away the moment life gets hard. The comments rolled in. You deserve better. Some people only care about themselves. She chose money over love. He didn't call me abusive. He didn't need to. He let people fill in the blanks. One comment slipped through before disappearing. Didn't you quit your job before she left? Deleted within minutes. Reality was closing in. He had 6 weeks to leave the apartment. No job, no savings, no backup plan. Because Damien never believed I would actually leave. When his mother called next, her voice was softer. He made mistakes, she said, but he loved you. He loved what I provided, I answered. That's not the same. Could you help him with rent, just temporarily? Ask him what happened to the engagement ring, I said. Silence, because we both knew he'd returned it months ago, for cash. I blocked her number afterward. 2 days later, my credit monitoring app sent an alert. Attempted credit card application. I froze my credit immediately, filed a fraud report, saved every message, every timestamp. Damien wasn't emotional. He was desperate, and desperate men don't plead. They escalate. I sat at my kitchen table that night, laptop open, organizing documentation. Messages, voicemails, screenshots. Because I understood something clearly now. Leaving hadn't ended the problem. It had exposed it, and if Damien had learned I was capable of walking away, he was about to learn I was capable of protecting myself too. By the second week, I stopped waking up tense. Not because Damien had disappeared, but because I'd accepted he wouldn't. Men like him don't let go quietly. They don't spiral inward. They look for leverage. Work became my anchor. Mornings had structure. Meetings had agendas. People followed through. I realized how abnormal my old life had been by contrast. How much energy I'd spent managing someone else's moods. Then, on a Wednesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail. Seconds later, my desk phone rang. Alina, the receptionist said carefully, there's someone here asking for you. My chest tightened. Who? He says he's your fiancé, claims it's urgent. I stood slowly, every instinct already screaming. I'll be right there, I said. When the elevator doors opened into the lobby, I saw him immediately. Damien stood near the security desk, shoulders squared, jaw set. He looked put together, pressed shirt, clean shoes, confident posture. Not frantic, not emotional. Prepared. The moment he saw me, his expression shifted into something rehearsed, concerned, familiar, entitled. There you are, he said, stepping forward. I've been trying to reach you. I didn't move toward him. I told you not to contact me, I said. He exhaled sharply, like I was being unreasonable. I drove 6 hours, he said. You couldn't answer a message? Security glanced between us. This isn't appropriate, I said. You need to leave. Damien's jaw flexed. We need to talk, face to face, like adults. We're done, I said. You showing up here doesn't change that. He took another step forward. Security moved immediately. Sir, the guard said calmly, positioning himself between us. You'll need to step back. Damien's eyes flicked to him, irritation flashing. This is between me and my fiancé, he said. I'm not causing a scene. You are, I replied. You're trespassing. His voice dropped, tight with anger. You can't hide behind security forever. I met his stare. I'm not hiding. I'm setting boundaries. Alina, he said, slower now, measured. I deserve a conversation. No, I said, you don't. I turned to security. Please escort him out. For the first time, his composure cracked. Not into tears, but into something sharper. You really think this makes you strong? He snapped. Running away? Security placed a hand near his shoulder, not touching, just warning. Sir, let's go. As they walked him toward the exit, Damien twisted his head back toward me. This isn't over, he said. You can't just erase me. The doors closed behind him. My hands were steady, but my pulse wasn't. HR called me in immediately. I explained everything. The breakup, the harassment, the attempted fraud. I showed them the screenshots, the call logs, the reports I'd already filed. They didn't question me. They documented it, circulated his photo to security, issued a formal trespass ban. You did the right thing, my manager said. Let us know if he tries anything again. That night, I didn't go straight home. I sat in my car in this parking lot, staring at the dashboard, replaying his last words. This isn't over. He hadn't said it in anger. He'd said it like a fact. That was when it clicked. If Damien knew where I worked, it was only a matter of time before he found where I lived. I went home and didn't unpack my bag. Instead, I opened my laptop. Restraining order requirements. Evidence checklists. Local filing procedures. Messages, voicemails, screenshots. I had more than enough. When people talk about closure, they imagine conversations, apologies, understanding. But sometimes closure looks like paperwork. Sometimes it looks like protection. And sometimes the only way to end something cleanly is to make it official. The restraining order didn't feel dramatic. It felt administrative. I filed it on a Thursday morning before work, sitting at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee that had already gone cold, screenshots organized by date, call logs highlighted, voicemails saved and transcribed. Every piece of evidence told the same story. Contact after being told to stop, attempts to access my finances, showing up uninvited at my workplace, threatening language that stopped just short of explicit violence. The clerk reviewed the paperwork without emotion. "You have enough here for a temporary order," she said. "A judge will review it today." By that afternoon, it was granted. Damien would be served within 48 hours. I didn't feel relieved. I felt prepared. Because people like Damien don't react to boundaries with reflection. They react with outrage. The same day the order went through, my old landlord texted me again. "Your ex is insisting you agreed to cover his rent going forward." I stared at the message, incredulous. I called him immediately. "No," I said, "absolutely not." He sighed. "That's what I thought. He's been difficult." Noise complaints, late-night phone arguments, attempted lock changes without permission. He'd even asked if he could stay a bit longer without paying, promising he'd make it up through online marketing. "How many followers does he have?" the landlord asked dryly. "Not enough to pay rent," I replied. "Exactly." The next day, Damien was served. According to my brother, who still lived nearby, it happened mid-afternoon. Damien opened the door, expecting a delivery. Instead, he got paperwork. He didn't call me. He didn't message. He did the only thing he had left. He called his friends. That weekend, the calls started coming in from unfamiliar numbers. I didn't answer. Voicemails piled up. "Hey, this is Aaron. Damien says you guys had a misunderstanding. He seems really sorry. Maybe hear him out?" I called Aaron back. "He tried to open a credit card in my name," I said. "That's not a misunderstanding." Silence. "Oh," Aaron said, "he didn't mention that." Of course he didn't. Over the next few days, I learned Damien had been making the rounds. Different story for different people. To one friend, I'd kicked him out with no notice. To another, I'd drained our savings. To someone else, I'd promised to support him while he figured things out and then disappeared. The details didn't matter. The angle did. He wasn't angry at me. He was angry that I'd stopped being useful. Most people saw through it quickly. The ones who didn't learn when he asked them for money. 500 here, 300 there. Always urgent, always temporary, always unpaid. By week 3, he ran out of couches. Then he violated the restraining order. It was subtle, like he thought he'd found a loophole. A new Instagram account followed me. No name, no photos. Just one message. "Living my best life. Guess I didn't need you after all." I took a screenshot, sent it to my lawyer. He responded within minutes. "Do not reply. We'll file." Back in court 2 weeks later, Damien stood in front of the judge, arms crossed, jaw tight. Not apologetic. Defensive. "I wasn't harassing her," he said. "It was just social media." "You contacted her directly," the judge replied. "That violates the order." Damien scoffed. "This is excessive." The judge didn't react. 50 hours of community service, he said. "Any further violation will result in jail time." Damien tried to argue, tried to explain, tried to justify. It didn't work. Outside the courtroom, he didn't look at me, didn't speak, didn't need to. The consequences were finally louder than he was. After court, the noise around Damien changed. Not louder, smaller, like a room with fewer exits. People stopped calling me to hear his side. Not because they suddenly became loyal to me, but because they were starting to experience him directly. The first fallout came faster than I expected. 10 days. That was how long his closest friend lasted. I found out through a text that came late one night. "I owe you an apology. I get it now." It was from Jade, the same friend who'd laughed at the restaurant, who'd told him I'd get over it. I didn't respond right away. She kept typing. "He said he just needed somewhere temporary. He said you blindsided him. He didn't say any of this. Apparently, temporary meant moving in like he owned the place. He ate food without replacing it, used people's things without asking, stayed up late pacing on calls, voice low and angry, brought strangers over without warning." Not dramatic, just invasive. By the end of the first week, Jade told him he needed to find somewhere else. He argued, raised his voice, told her she was betraying him, just like I had. That pattern repeated. Couch to couch, friend to friend. Each stop ended the same way. Damien didn't adapt. He didn't recalibrate. He acted like every space he entered should bend around him. And when it didn't, he left behind confusion, resentment, and stories where he was always the victim. One friend told me later that Damien had described me as cold. Another said he called me calculating. He never said I was cruel. He never said I was abusive. He said I'd walked away, like that was the unforgivable sin. By the end of the month, he was running out of people willing to answer his calls. That was when he tried again. Not through friends, not through family, directly. Another fake account, different platform. The message was short. Funny how quiet your life gets when you think you've won. I forwarded it to my lawyer without replying. Within a week, Damien was back in court. This time, the judge didn't ask many questions. "You were explicitly told not to contact her," he said. "You did it anyway." Damien leaned forward, hands braced on the table. "This is harassment?" he asked, incredulous. "She's trying to ruin my life." The judge didn't raise his voice. "Sir, you are here because of your actions." The order was extended. The warning was clear. Next violation meant jail time. Damien left the courtroom stiff-backed, eyes forward, saying nothing. He didn't look defeated. He looked angry. Anger without options is dangerous, but it's also unsustainable. Because rage burns fuel fast, and Damien was nearly out. By the time he finally left the state, it wasn't dramatic. No announcement. No final message. Just a quiet disappearance. Word traveled slowly, then all at once. He'd moved back in with his parents. Same house, same room, same rules. Part-time work at a mall. Minimum hours. Strict schedules. People who'd once defended him stopped mentioning his name. It wasn't loyalty that faded. It was energy. Keeping up with someone like Damien takes effort. And eventually, everyone gets tired. I didn't feel victorious when I heard. I felt finished. For the first time since the restaurant, I wasn't bracing for impact. I wasn't waiting for the next escalation. My life had space again. Not just physical space. Mental space. Emotional space. The kind you don't realize you're missing until it comes back. I stopped checking my phone for threats. Stopped scanning rooms for exits. Stopped rehearsing conversations that would never happen. And one quiet evening, sitting alone in my apartment, it finally hit me. Damien's power had never been real. It existed only as long as I stayed. And the moment I walked away, it collapsed. 2 months passed. Not with a bang, but with a slow, steady settling. The kind of quiet that doesn't announce itself, but proves it's real by staying. I didn't hear Damien's name anymore. Not through friends, not through family, not through random texts that started with, "I don't want to get involved, but..." Those dried up when there was nothing left to involve anyone in. The restraining order stayed in place. He didn't violate it again. Not because he suddenly respected boundaries, but because the consequences had finally become unavoidable. Jail time wasn't abstract anymore. It was next. Through the grapevine, I learned what had happened after he moved back in with his parents. The same patterns, the same entitlement. They made him pay rent, set curfews, expected consistency. He hated it. He complained to anyone who would listen that he'd been forced backwards in life, that people didn't understand his potential, that he'd been sabotaged. He never mentioned choices. He never mentioned responsibility. He told people I'd manipulated the system, that I'd won, but that word didn't fit, because winning implies competition. And I hadn't been playing against him. I'd been trying to save myself. One night, a message came through from an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. Almost. It was from his mother. "I hope you're happy. You broke my son." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I typed, "No, I stopped carrying him," and blocked the number. That was the last contact of any kind. After that, life became ordinary. In the best way. Work continued to go well. I was trusted, respected, listened to. My ideas weren't dismissed or mocked or minimized. I made friends who didn't test my boundaries to see how flexible they were. I started dating again. Not seriously at first. Just conversations, coffee, dinners that actually started on time. And the strangest thing happened. No one threatened me. No one told me I'd regret leaving. No one implied I was lucky to be tolerated. One night, after a date, I sat alone in my apartment and thought back to the restaurant. To Damien's voice, low, confident, certain. "You'll regret it if you ever leave." At the time, it sounded powerful. Now it sounded like fear. Because people who believe you're replaceable don't warn you about regret. They don't need to. Warnings come from people who sense their grip slipping. My only regret wasn't leaving. It was staying as long as I did. Thinking endurance was love. Thinking silence was maturity. Thinking being easy would eventually earn respect. It never does. The lesson wasn't complicated, but it was hard-earned. When someone tells you that you'll regret leaving them, listen closely. They're not predicting your future. They're revealing their own. And sometimes the most unexpected plot twist of your life is choosing yourself and discovering how peaceful the world becomes when you do. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with my story. I'm sharing this not for sympathy and not to paint myself as a hero, but because I know how easy it is to mistake endurance for love, to believe that staying quiet, staying patient, staying easy, will eventually earn you respect. It won't. When someone tells you that you'll regret leaving them, listen carefully. That isn't confidence, it's fear. Fear of losing control, fear of facing consequences, fear of being exposed without someone else carrying the weight. Walking away isn't weakness. Protecting yourself isn't cruelty. And choosing peace doesn't make you heartless. If you're in a situation that feels familiar, where your boundaries are ignored, your presence is optional, and your worth is constantly questioned, know this. You're allowed to leave. You're allowed to choose yourself, and you're allowed to build a life that feels calm instead of chaotic. Thank you to everyone who shared their own stories or offered support in the comments. I read more than you know, and they matter. If this resonated with you, consider liking, sharing, or subscribing. It helps these stories reach the people who need them most. I'll see you in the next video. And in the meantime, take care of yourself. Have you ever been told that you were embarrassing? Not because of who you were, but because of how you looked next to someone else. Today's story is about a young woman who hears that word from the person she trusted most. My name is Avery Halston. I'm 24. And I didn't realize my relationship was already ending when my boyfriend said the words. Not because he yelled, not because he cheated, not because I caught him in a lie, but because of the way he said it, like it was reasonable, like it was a minor inconvenience, the kind of thing you say when you're asking someone to step aside so you can take a photo without them in the frame. The dress was hanging from the closet door, a sharp, expensive shade of navy that looked almost black in our bedroom light. It didn't belong in our apartment. Not really. Not in the small space with mismatched nightstands and the beige walls we kept promising we'd repaint when we had time. He stood in front of the mirror, tugging at the collar of his shirt, turning his body slightly left and right, checking how he looked from every angle. The mirror wasn't for me. It wasn't even for him. It was for a room he wasn't in yet. "Does this look too much?" he asked, voice tight with that restless kind of anxiety that doesn't want comfort. It wants control. I sat on the edge of our bed, watching him like I'd watched him 100 times. 2 years ago, this bed had been a pile of wood and screws. We built it together on a Sunday afternoon, laughing when the instructions didn't make sense, arguing over which piece was obviously the headboard. My hands still remembered the weight of the Allen key. My chest still remembered how he'd leaned in and kissed my temple and said, "I love doing life with you." Now he smoothed the fabric over his stomach and frowned. "You look good," I said, and I meant it. "You look really good." He exhaled like my words were background noise. "Jessica posted the guest list," he said, tapping his phone. "Tyler Briggs is coming." The name meant nothing to me at first. Then he added, "You know, that guy who started that crypto advisory firm, drives a G-Wagon, like actual money." I nodded, unsure what response he wanted. For months, this reunion had been building inside him like a storm system. It started as a casual mention, 10-year reunion, might go, and slowly turned into a campaign. New haircut, a sudden interest in spin classes, a new watch, a new way of talking about success like it was a room he was finally being invited into. I'd assumed my role was simple: show up, smile, be the person who had loved him before he needed an audience. I tried to keep my tone light. "So, what's the final plan for Saturday? Are we meeting the group there, or—" He stopped adjusting his shirt. In the mirror, his eyes met mine, then flicked away. He ran a hand through his hair. The room went quiet in the way it does right before something breaks. The air conditioner hummed. A car passed outside. The clock ticked, suddenly too loud. He turned to face me, his expression settling into something practiced. Apology, measured. Condescension, disguised as concern. "Look, Avery," he said carefully, "it's a specific crowd." My stomach tightened before my mind caught up. "There are a lot of successful people from my year," he continued. "Lawyers, consultants, people who, He made a vague gesture with his hand, like success was something you could physically point to. "Have built real lives." He wasn't looking at me. "Matthew's wife is a cardiothoracic surgeon," he added. "Daniel's wife sold her app last year. It's just that kind of night." The words landed one by one, stacking on top of each other. Men he respected, men he measured himself against, men whose wives made them look complete. I waited for the sentence to turn, for him to say, "And I want you there anyway," for him to say, "We'll handle it together." Instead, he sighed and waved his hand toward me. "I can't spend the whole night explaining what you do," he said, "or why you're still, finding your path." The room seemed to tilt. He continued, voice thinning, faintly mocking now. It becomes this whole thing. She's still figuring it out. She's not really established yet. He stopped himself, like even describing me was exhausting. Then he said it. Not angrily, not cruelly, casually. It's embarrassing. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. The word sat between us, solid, undeniable, embarrassing. My mind jumped backward without warning. 2 years ago. This same room. He was sitting on the floor, back against the bed, face in his hands, shaking. He'd just bombed a presentation and was convinced he'd ruined his future. I'd sat down beside him, pulled him into my arms, ordered his favorite food, and opened my laptop. I stayed up half the night helping him rebuild his slides, fixing his phrasing, calming him down when his hands wouldn't stop trembling. "You're my rock," he'd whispered. "I'd be lost without you." Now I was the weight dragging him down. I looked at him, the carefully styled hair, the expensive shirt, the tension in his eyes that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with how he would be perceived. He wasn't worried about me. He was worried about how I reflected on him. Something in me shifted, not anger, not yet. Clarity. I didn't argue, I didn't defend myself, I didn't remind him of everything I'd done or everything we'd been. All of it drained out of me in one slow exhale. "Absolutely," I said. Flat, calm. Not agreement. Acknowledgement. Relief washed over his face instantly. He misread my stillness for compliance. "You're the best," he said, bright again. He kissed my cheek, quick, dry, transactional. "I'll make it up to you," he added. "We'll order that fancy sushi tomorrow. Just us. It'll be better than dealing with all that drama." Then he turned back to the mirror, grabbing his phone. "I need to text the group," he said. "Jessica was betting you'd throw a fit." He laughed softly as he typed. Crisis averted. I watched him in the mirror, the focus, the satisfaction, the absence of concern for me. "Absolutely," I said again, so quietly it barely existed. This time it wasn't for him. It was for me, because in that moment I understood something I hadn't had words for before. Some people don't leave you. They just shrink you, slowly, politely, one comparison at a time, until you're small enough to fit into their image. And I had just decided I wasn't going to do that anymore. The click of the front door closing behind him a few minutes later didn't feel like a goodbye. It felt like a starting pistol. I stood alone in the living room, listening to the hollow silence rush in. I walked to the window and watched his rideshare disappear into traffic. Gone. My phone was already in my hand. No drama, no music, just a list of tasks assembling quietly in my chest. I scrolled to my sister's name, paused, then pressed call. The door clicked shut behind him, and for a moment I stayed exactly where I was, standing in the middle of the living room, keys still on the counter, the faint smell of his cologne hanging in the air, like a question no one was going to answer. Then my knees gave out. Not dramatically, not in a way that would look good on screen. I just slid down until I was sitting on the floor with my back against the couch, arms wrapped around myself, breathing shallow and uneven like my body had forgotten the correct rhythm. I didn't cry right away. That surprised me. I'd always thought heartbreak announced itself loudly. Sobs, shaking shoulders, gasping breaths. Instead, what I felt first was something closer to embarrassment. A hot, creeping shame that settled in my chest and spread outward, as if his word had stained me and now I had to sit with it. Embarrassing. I said it silently, testing how it felt in my own head. It felt wrong there, too. I pressed my palm against the carpet, grounding myself in the texture. The room looked the same as it had an hour ago, but it wasn't. The couch we'd picked out because it was practical. The coffee table with a nick on the corner from the night he dropped it during move-in. The framed photo on the shelf. Us at a friend's birthday party. My head tilted toward his shoulder, smiling like I belonged there. I reached out and turned the frame face down. That was when I started crying. Quietly. The kind of crying you do when you're trying not to scare yourself. My chest tightened, breath hitching, and I pressed my knuckles to my mouth to keep any sound from escaping, as if he might still be in the hallway, as if I still needed to be convenient. I stayed like that for a while. I don't know how long. Time didn't feel linear anymore. It felt thick, heavy. Eventually, I stood up and walked to the bathroom. The mirror caught me off guard. My eyes were red, lashes clumped together, cheeks blotchy. I looked younger than 24 in that moment, like a girl who had believed she was building something solid and had just realized she'd been standing on borrowed ground. I ran cold water over my wrists and splashed my face. Took a breath. Another. I practiced neutral, the version of myself that didn't make things harder. Then my phone buzzed. For half a second, my heart leapt in a way that made me angry at myself. I grabbed it too fast, thumb smudging the screen. It wasn't him. A notification. Some automated email. Nothing that mattered. I sat on the edge of the tub, phone in my lap, staring at it anyway. The thought crept in, quiet and dangerous. Maybe I should say something. Not to fight, not to argue, just to clarify, to tell him how it felt, to explain that I wasn't nothing, that I was trying, that I wasn't ashamed of my life, even if he was. My fingers hovered over his name. I imagined the message forming. That hurt. You didn't have to say it like that. I'm still your girlfriend. The word girlfriend suddenly felt fragile, temporary, like a title that only existed as long as it served him. I locked my phone and set it face down on the counter. If I started explaining myself now, I'd never stop. I walked back into the bedroom and opened the closet. His side was immaculate, shirts arranged by color, shoes lined up just so. My side was messier, a mix of work clothes, old hoodies, dresses I wore less and less because they didn't feel like they fit into the life he was aiming for. I pulled out a suitcase. The sound of the zipper was louder than it should have been. It made my chest tighten again, but this time there was something underneath the pain. Resolve, maybe, or panic turning into motion. I started with the basics. Clothes I wore to work, jeans, sweaters, the hoodie with the frayed cuff that he hated because it looked sloppy. I folded it carefully and placed it on top. My hands were shaking now, not uncontrollably, but enough that I had to slow myself down. Breathe, fold, place, repeat. Every object carried a memory, and I couldn't afford to touch all of them. I moved like someone in a fire, quick, focused, only grabbing what I needed to survive. I paused at the nightstand. On it sat the watch I'd bought him last year. Not expensive, just something I'd saved up for because he'd mentioned wanting a grown-up one. He'd worn it to his first big meeting and texted me afterward. They took me seriously today. I left it where it was. The bed was next. I sat down for a second longer than necessary, fingers digging into the comforter. This bed had held our conversations about the future, the vague ones, the someday ones, travel, apartments, the kind of talk that feels meaningful until you realize it never included real commitment. My chest tightened again, sharp this time. I stood up before it could swallow me. The note came last. I sat at the kitchen counter, the stool wobbling slightly beneath me, and stared at a blank sheet of paper. My pen hovered, hesitating. This was the moment where people usually poured everything out. Accusations, pain, proof. I didn't have the energy for any of that. I wrote slowly, carefully, hand cramping as if my body was resisting the finality of it. No drama, no explanations, just facts. When I finished, I read it once, then again. My vision blurred, but the words stayed clear. I folded the paper and placed it in the center of the counter. I set my key beside it. That sound, the soft clink of metal against laminate, felt heavier than anything he'd said. I checked the time, still hours before he'd be back. Good. I zipped the suitcase shut and dragged it toward the door. My phone buzzed again as I reached for the handle. Another message. Unknown number. For one terrifying second, I thought it might be him already, calling from the car, reconsidering, asking me to wait. It wasn't. I didn't open it. I picked up my suitcase, took one last look at the apartment, the life I'd tried to fit myself into, and turned the handle. The door closed behind me with a soft, ordinary sound. No thunder, no music, just the quiet understanding that something irreversible had begun. I stood in the hallway, breathing in air that didn't belong to him, and finally did the thing I'd been avoiding. I scrolled to my sister's name and pressed call. She answered on the second ring. Avery, she said, what's wrong? My voice cracked on the first word. I need a place to stay, I said, tonight. She didn't ask questions. She didn't tell me to calm down. She didn't say I told you so. Come, she said. I'm here. I closed my eyes and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for years. Then I walked down the stairs and out into the night, carrying only what I could hold in my hands and leaving the rest behind. My sister lived across town in a small apartment that always smelled faintly of coffee and laundry detergent. When I arrived, she was already waiting by the door in sweatpants and an old college hoodie, hair pulled into a loose knot. She didn't look surprised, just ready. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug so tight it knocked the breath out of me. I didn't say anything at first. I couldn't. My throat closed the moment her arms wrapped around me, and the tears I'd been holding back spilled over, hot, fast, humiliating. It's okay, she murmured into my hair. You don't have to explain right now. That was when I broke for real. Not loudly, not in a way that felt dramatic or cleansing. I cried the way you cry when you're still trying to be reasonable. Quiet, shoulders shaking, jaw clenched, like if you held yourself together hard enough, the pain might pass through without leaving a mark. She led me inside and sat me on the couch, made tea I didn't drink, draped a blanket over my shoulders like she was afraid I might shatter if exposed to air. I stayed there the rest of the night, half awake, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slow, useless circles above me. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice again. It's embarrassing. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes and a dull ache behind them, like my head had been bruised from the inside. My phone lay on the coffee table where I'd left it, dark and silent. No messages. That shouldn't have mattered, but it did. I showered, dressed, and drank half a cup of coffee before my sister finally spoke. Do you want to go back and get the rest of your stuff? She asked carefully. Or do you want me to come with you? The idea of walking back into that apartment alone made my stomach twist. Can you come? I asked. She nodded immediately. Of course. We went late morning, when the building was quiet and the neighbors were at work. I unlocked the door with my spare key, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. Nothing had changed. That was the worst part. The couch still sat where we'd left it, the throw blanket folded neatly over the arm, his shoes by the door, lined up with care. The air smelled the same, his soap, his laundry detergent, the faint citrus of the cleaner I'd used the night before. It felt like I'd imagined leaving. My suitcase still stood by the door, exactly where I'd abandoned it in my rush to get out. I dragged it back into the bedroom and opened it on the bed. This time the packing was different. Last night, I'd moved fast, grabbing only what I needed to survive. Now, every item felt loaded. Every drawer I opened carried a memory I hadn't agreed to revisit. I pulled out a sweater I loved, but rarely wore because he'd once joked it made me look like I was trying too hard to be cozy. I folded it anyway. A stack of t-shirts he'd stretched out over time, borrowing without asking. I hesitated, then set them aside. They weren't mine anymore. My sister stood quietly in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me with a kind of restraint I recognized. She was letting me do this myself. I opened the closet and reached for a dress I hadn't worn in months. It was soft, pale green, the kind of dress that made me feel like myself. Comfortable, unremarkable, real. He'd once suggested I wear something sharper instead, more polished, more impressive. I held the dress against my chest for a second longer than necessary. My throat tightened. You don't have to take everything today, my sister said gently. I know, I replied. I just need to take me. She didn't laugh. She didn't soften the moment. She just nodded. The bathroom was next. My toothbrush still sat in its cup beside his, angled toward his like it had been leaning there for support. I threw it away without hesitation. Small mercies. In the living room, I stopped at the bookshelf. There was a framed photo on the second shelf, the same one I'd turned face down the night before. I picked it up, studied it for a moment. We looked happy, not performative happy, just young, hopeful, unaware of how conditional things would become. I slid the photo out of the frame and left the frame behind. We worked quietly for an hour, maybe two. Time moved strangely, stretching, folding in on itself. Every now and then, my phone buzzed with a notification that wasn't him, a spam email, a group chat I muted without reading. He still hadn't reached out. By the time we were done, the apartment looked subtly wrong. Empty corners, gaps on shelves, a closet that leaned unmistakably toward one side. I took one last walk through each room. The kitchen counter was bare except for the note I'd left and the key beside it. Seeing them again sent a sharp pang through my chest. Regret, maybe, or just grief catching up to me. My sister waited by the door. You ready? She asked. I looked around one final time. This place had been the container for a version of me that tried very hard to be enough. That version deserved better, even if she didn't know it yet. I think so, I said. We locked the door behind us. As we walked down the hallway, I felt something shift. Not relief, not empowerment. Just a strange, quiet reclaiming. Like I was taking something back that I hadn't realized I'd given away piece by piece. In the car, my phone finally buzzed again. This time, it was his name. My heart jumped before I could stop it. I didn't answer. I turned the phone face down in my lap and stared out the window as we drove away. Whatever he had to say now, I wasn't ready to hear it. And for the first time, that choice felt like mine. The first night back at my sister's place, I didn't sleep. I lay on the futon in her spare room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of a life that wasn't mine. Pipes clicking, a neighbor's TV murmuring through the wall, the soft whir of a fan oscillating back and forth. Every noise felt borrowed, temporary. That should have scared me. Instead, it steadied me. Heartbreak, I was learning, didn't always feel like collapse. Sometimes it felt like standing in the wreckage and realizing, slowly, quietly, that the thing you were afraid of losing had already been gone. I checked my phone just once. One missed call. No message. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I wanted to hear his voice, but because it confirmed something I hadn't been ready to admit yet. Even now, even after everything, he expected me to come back. Expected my silence to be a pause, not a boundary. I turned the phone face down and let the ache settle. The next morning, my sister slid a mug of coffee across the kitchen counter toward me like an offering. "You can stay as long as you need," she said. "No pressure." "Thank you," I replied. My voice sounded hoarse, like it had been scraped raw overnight. She watched me for a moment, then added gently, "You don't look stupid, or embarrassing, or behind. You look hurt." That was it. That was the crack. Tears spilled over again, but this time they didn't feel like shame. They felt like release. "I feel like I missed something obvious," I said. "Like everyone else knew how this worked and I didn't." She shook her head. "No, you trusted someone. That's not ignorance. That's youth." Youth. The word landed differently than embarrassing had. It didn't shrink me. It explained me. I spent the next few days moving slowly through the world, like my nervous system was recalibrating. I went to work. I answered emails. I smiled when people spoke to me. From the outside, I probably looked functional. Inside, everything was rearranging itself. I replayed conversations I hadn't thought twice about before, comments he'd made casually, jokes about my job, about my clothes, about how I didn't need to rush because he was the ambitious one. At the time, I'd laughed along. I'd told myself love meant compromise, that someone had to be the flexible one. I was starting to understand that flexibility, when it only bent one way, was just another word for erasure. By the end of the week, the shock wore off, and something else took its place. Clarity. Not the sharp, icy kind that makes you feel invincible. The quieter kind. The kind that shows you patterns instead of moments. The kind that says, "This didn't come out of nowhere." He texted on day 6. "We should talk." That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just an assumption that conversation was something he could summon on demand. I stared at the message for a long time. My chest tightened, not with longing, but with the old instinct to smooth things over, to be reasonable, to make it easier. I didn't reply. On day 8, another message. "You took this the wrong way." I almost laughed. On day 10, he called. I watched the phone vibrate on the table, his name lighting up the screen like a test I hadn't studied for. I didn't answer. Each time I chose not to respond, something shifted inside me. The ache didn't vanish, but it changed shape. It stopped being a wound and started becoming a scar. Still tender, but closed. I wasn't healed, but I was coming back online. One evening, as I sat at my sister's kitchen table scrolling through job listings I didn't even know I was interested in before, she looked over my shoulder. "You're different," she said, "already." I frowned. "Different how?" "Straighter," she replied, "like you're not folding yourself in half anymore." I hadn't noticed. But she was right. Heartbreak had cracked me open, yes, but it hadn't hollowed me out. What rushed in through the opening wasn't bitterness or revenge. It was space. Space to hear my own thoughts again. Space to remember what I wanted before I started asking what would make him proud. Space to imagine a life that didn't require me to audition for it. That night, lying in the dark, I finally slept. And for the first time since he said the word embarrassing, I didn't dream about him. I dreamed about myself, standing somewhere unfamiliar, uncertain, but upright. Still young, still hurt, but no longer disappearing. Whatever came next, I knew one thing with a certainty that surprised me. I wasn't done. I was just getting my footing. By the second week, the silence stopped feeling dramatic. It stopped feeling like a statement. It started to feel like maintenance. I didn't wake up thinking about him anymore. Not first thing. The mornings were occupied by smaller, more practical thoughts. What to wear, whether I had time to stop for coffee, if I remembered to bring my charger. Ordinary things. Anchors. The heartbreak was still there, but it had moved deeper, like a bruise you only notice when you press on it. I kept my phone on silent. Not out of spite, out of self-preservation. There was a difference I was only beginning to understand. When he texted again, day 14 this time, I didn't even feel a spike of adrenaline, just a dull recognition, like seeing a familiar billboard on a road you no longer drove. "You don't get to just disappear like this." That one sat with me longer. Disappear. The word was almost impressive in its audacity, as if my presence had been an obligation, as if my silence was theft, as if access to me was something he was owed. I typed a response without thinking. I didn't disappear. I left. My thumb hovered over the send button. This was the dangerous moment, the one people don't warn you about, the part after the initial heartbreak, when the pain is quieter and that makes it easier to doubt yourself. I imagined his reply, defensive, reasonable sounding, carefully phrased to make me feel like I'd misunderstood him again. I deleted the draft. Silence wasn't about punishing him. It was about not reopening a wound just because someone else didn't like how it healed. I put the phone down and went for a walk. It was late afternoon, the sky washed in that soft gold that makes everything feel temporary. Couples passed me on the sidewalk. A woman laughed too loudly into her phone. Somewhere, music played from an open window. The world hadn't ended. That realization landed slowly, but when it did, it carried weight. I'd spent so long thinking love was something you earned by being flexible, agreeable, low maintenance. I was starting to see how much of myself I'd folded away in the process, how often I'd swallowed discomfort to avoid being difficult. I'd thought that made me mature. Now it just felt unfinished. At my sister's place, I began doing small, quiet things for myself. Not reinvention, not transformation, just reclamation. I reorganized the dresser drawer that had become mine. I washed my clothes separately, using a detergent I liked instead of the one he preferred. I started making playlists again, songs I'd stopped playing because he found them a little sad. No one applauded, no one noticed. And that was the point. One night, as I was brushing my teeth, my sister leaned against the bathroom door frame and watched me for a moment. "You're not going back," she said. Not a question. I met my reflection in the mirror. My eyes still looked tired. But there was something else there now. Alignment, maybe. "No," I said. And this time, the word didn't shake. She nodded once, like she'd expected that answer. The next message came from an unknown number. I knew it was him before I opened it. "I'm sorry about what I said. I was stressed. You know how important image is in my industry." There it was. Not I was wrong, not I hurt you. Just context, just justification. My chest tightened, not with longing, but with a familiar frustration. The kind that comes from realizing someone still didn't see the point. I almost replied, almost explained again why that wasn't an apology. Instead, I blocked the number. The finality of it surprised me. My finger hovered for half a second before tapping confirm, like my body was checking with my mind one last time. Then it was done. I didn't feel victorious. I felt lighter. Later that night, lying in bed, I thought about the girl I'd been at 24, the one who'd believed being loved meant being chosen publicly, introduced proudly, displayed. I wished I could tell her something. That love isn't proven by how someone shows you off. That respect doesn't come with conditions, that you don't have to disappear quietly just because someone else is embarrassed by your becoming. I couldn't go back and save her from the hurt, but I could make sure she didn't go through it again. And for the first time since everything broke, I felt it clearly, steady and unmissable. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was holding me up. I didn't hear about the reunion from him. I heard about it from someone else. A name I hadn't thought about in months popped up on my phone one afternoon while I was at work. Someone who had always hovered on the edges of our social circle. Neutral, observant. The kind of person who noticed more than they spoke. I stared at the notification for a long moment before opening it. "Hey, hope you're doing okay. I ran into him last weekend. Things were rough." Rough. That word used to make me nervous. It used to send me spiraling into questions. What happened? Did I cause it? Should I fix it? This time it didn't. I typed back carefully. "What do you mean?" The reply came quickly, almost relieved. "He showed up alone. Everyone noticed. People kept asking where you were. I could picture it without trying. The room, the noise, the practiced silent smiles. The way introductions worked at those events. Names, jobs, spouses placed neatly beside them like credentials. He tried to joke it off at first. The message continued. Said you had work, said you couldn't make it. But the questions didn't stop. My chest tightened, not with jealousy, but with recognition. He had always underestimated how closely people listened. Someone mentioned how you used to be his rock. He froze, like he didn't know what story to tell anymore. I closed my eyes. I could see that moment clearly. The split second where the performance falters, where the script runs out. After that, it got awkward, the message went on. He started drinking more, loud at first, then quiet. By the end of the night, most people were avoiding him. I imagined him standing near the bar, glass in hand, scanning the room for validation that wasn't coming. I imagined the absence beside him, the space where I should have been, not as a prop, but as proof. Someone even asked if you two were okay, and he snapped. Said you were going through something. Going through something. I let out a slow breath. That had always been his fallback, framing my reactions as instability, as something temporary and inconvenient. The final message came a few minutes later. Honestly, the vibe was bad. People were uncomfortable. I think it shook him. I set my phone face down on the desk and stared at the wall. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. What I felt was quiet confirmation. The fear he'd spoken out loud, that being associated with me would diminish him, had come true in the most ironic way possible. Not because of me, but because I wasn't there. His image hadn't cracked because I embarrassed him. It cracked because the thing that steadied him, the thing that grounded him, was gone. And without it, there was nothing to hide behind. That night, I walked home slower than usual. The air was cool, the sky low and gray, the city moving around me in its usual indifference. I thought about the reunion, not as a spectacle, but as a mirror. He had spent so much time worrying about how others would see him with me. He'd never considered how he'd look without me. Back at my sister's apartment, I made dinner for both of us. Something simple: pasta, garlic, olive oil, the kind of meal you make when you're tired but still taking care. She watched me move around the kitchen for a moment before speaking. You heard something, didn't you? I nodded. Yeah. She waited. It didn't go well for him, I said finally. Her mouth tightened, not in satisfaction, but in understanding. How do you feel about that? I thought about it honestly. I feel done, I said, like the story caught up to itself. She smiled softly. That's usually how it happens. Later, alone in bed, I replayed his words from that night, not with pain this time, but with distance. It's embarrassing. He'd been right about one thing. That night was revealing, just not in the way he'd planned. I turned off the light and let the quiet settle around me, steady and intact. Whatever he was going through now, it wasn't mine to carry. And whatever came next for me, I knew this much. I didn't need to prove my worth in rooms that only valued performance. The strongest thing I'd done wasn't leaving. It was not going back to explain myself once the world started seeing what I already had. The message came late. Not late at night. The other kind of late. The kind that shows up after silence has already done its work. After weeks have passed. After the shock has dulled and routine has returned, just enough to make you feel like yourself again. It was from a number I didn't recognize. I knew immediately who it was. I didn't mean it like that. I've been thinking a lot. I miss you. 3 lines. No greeting. No acknowledgement of time, just an assumption that the door was still unlocked. My chest tightened in a way that caught me off guard. Not because I missed him, because my body remembered what it used to feel like to be needed. I sat on the edge of my sister's bed, phone glowing in the dim light, and let the moment stretch. This was the dangerous part no one talks about. The phase after heartbreak, when you're no longer bleeding, but the scar still aches when touched. I typed. What you said. I stopped. Deleted it. I typed again. I didn't deserve that. Deleted. My fingers hovered over the screen, shaking slightly now. I hated that part. The physical betrayal of it. The way muscle memory reached for something my mind had already left behind. I imagined the conversation if I responded. Him apologizing without apologizing. Me explaining things I'd already explained. Him promising change in the abstract, never the specific. I imagined the relief on his face. Not relief that he'd hurt me, but relief that he'd gotten access back. That was the moment something clicked. He didn't miss me. He missed the version of himself who felt stable when I was around. The realization landed quietly, but it landed hard. I closed my eyes and let myself feel the grief I'd been avoiding. Not for him, but for the girl I'd been when I loved him. The one who believed closeness meant endurance. Who thought loyalties meant staying quiet when something hurt. I unlocked my phone one last time and read the message again. Then I turned it off. Not blocked. Not deleted. Just unanswered. I needed to know I could choose not to engage without making it dramatic, that I could let a door stay closed without slamming it. The next morning, I woke up lighter. Not healed, not triumphant. Just steadier. At work, I caught myself laughing with a coworker over something small and stupid. A printer jam, a shared eye roll at an email. The sound surprised me. It felt unused, like a muscle I hadn't stretched in a while. That afternoon, my sister texted from the other room. You okay? You seem quiet today. I smiled at the screen. Yeah, I typed back. Just realizing some things. What I didn't say was this. That heartbreak had stripped me down to something honest. That silence had taught me more than arguments ever did. That the hardest part wasn't leaving. It was not going back once you were no longer needed. That night, I finally deleted the message. Not angrily. Not ceremoniously. Just the way you delete something that no longer applies. I lay in bed afterward, staring at the ceiling, and felt something unfamiliar but welcome settle into my chest. Confidence, maybe. Or trust in myself. I didn't know what came next. I only knew this. The girl who would have answered that message no longer lived here. And the woman I was becoming didn't need to explain why. I didn't plan to see him again. That's the thing people don't understand about moments like this. You don't script them. They happen in the margins of your life, when you're finally not thinking about the person anymore. It was a Saturday morning. Early. The kind of morning that feels quiet even in a city. I'd gone to the gym near my sister's place because it was cheap, clean, and anonymous. No shared memories. No inside jokes embedded in the walls. I was leaving, towel slung over my shoulder, hair damp, head still buzzing from the endorphins, when I saw him, leaning against my car. For half a second, my brain refused to register it, like seeing a ghost in daylight. He didn't belong in this version of my life, and my body reacted before my mind caught up. Heart jumping, breath hitching, fingers tightening around my keys. He looked smaller. Not physically, something else. The polish was gone. His hair was pushed back in a way that felt rushed, not styled. The jacket he wore was one I didn't recognize, new maybe, like he'd been trying to step into a role without rehearsing it first. "Avery," he said, pushing off the car as soon as he saw me. Relief crossed his face too quickly. "Thank God. I've been trying to reach you." I stopped a few feet away, not close enough to touch, not far enough to pretend he wasn't there. "You shouldn't be here," I said. My voice surprised me. It was calm, not cold, just factual. The way you tell someone they're in the wrong line. His expression flickered. "I just needed to talk," he said quickly. "You didn't answer. You blocked me. I didn't know what else to do." I hadn't blocked him, not at first. But I didn't correct him. "I was stressed," he continued, words tumbling out now. "The reunion, work, everything piling up. I said something stupid. I didn't mean it the way it came out." There it was again. I didn't mean it, as if intention erased impact. He stepped closer, eyes searching my face for something familiar, emotion, softness, the opening he used to step through without asking. I didn't move. "You know how important image is in my industry," he added. "I was just trying to fit in." Fit in. The phrase rang hollow now. I studied him the way you study something you've already decided not to buy. Not with contempt, with clarity. "I know," I said. He blinked. "You do?" "I know you care a lot about how you're seen," I continued. "More than how things actually are." That wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. His jaw tightened. "That's not fair. I never said I was ashamed of you." I held his gaze. "You said you were embarrassed to introduce me." The words sat between us, clean and unadorned. No emotion attached. Just truth. He opened his mouth, then closed it. "I was hoping you'd fight me on it," he admitted suddenly, "that you'd push back, prove me wrong." The honesty startled me more than the manipulation ever had. I felt something in my chest loosen. "So you wanted me to beg," I said softly, "so you could feel better about yourself." He flinched. "That's not—" "I'm not saying that to hurt you," I interrupted gently. "I'm saying it because that's when I realized something." He waited. "I don't want to be with someone who needs me smaller so they can feel bigger." Silence stretched between us. A car passed behind him. Somewhere a door slammed. His eyes filled, not dramatically, but with panic, the kind that comes when a narrative collapses. "I can do better," he said. "I just need time." I believed he believed that. But belief wasn't enough anymore. "I'm sure you can," I said, "just not with me." I unlocked my car. The sound seemed to jolt him back into urgency. "Please," he said, voice cracking now. "Don't do this. We're good together. You're my person." The phrase echoed something he'd said once, long ago, when it had meant safety instead of ownership. I looked at him, really looked, and felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Not for the pain, for the clarity. "I'm not your person," I said quietly. "I was your support system, and I don't live there anymore." I got into the car and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing there, frozen, hands hanging uselessly at his sides, like he'd just realized he'd missed the last train. I didn't wait to see what he did next. I drove away. My hands shook on the steering wheel for a few blocks, adrenaline crashing through me all at once. I pulled over when it became too much, breathing through it, grounding myself the way I'd learned to do in the weeks since I left. This was the part no one warned me about. Leaving wasn't the hardest thing. Staying gone was. But as my heartbeat slowed and the world came back into focus, I felt it, steady and unmistakable. I hadn't shrunk. I hadn't disappeared. I'd stood there fully myself and walked away anyway. And that, more than anything, told me I was going to be okay. 6 months is a strange amount of time. It's long enough for other people to assume you're over it, short enough for you to still feel the outline of the old pain if you press in the wrong place. By then, I wasn't living at my sister's anymore. I'd found a small one-bedroom a few neighborhoods over, nothing impressive, nothing curated. It smelled like fresh paint and cheap coffee. The windows faced another building, close enough that I could see someone else's life happening in fragments. A plant being watered, a light turned off, a curtain pulled closed. I liked that. It felt honest. My furniture was minimal. A couch I bought secondhand, a desk by the window, a bed that didn't carry anyone else's expectations in its frame. Every object in the apartment was there because I chose it, not because it fit someone else's idea of adulthood. The first night I slept there, I lay on the mattress on the floor and laughed quietly to myself. Not because I was happy, but because I was free of something I hadn't known how to name before. Life didn't transform overnight. There was no montage, no dramatic reinvention. I still went to the same job, still worried about money, still second-guessed myself more than I wanted to admit. But something fundamental had shifted. I no longer measured my days by how palatable I was to someone else. I stopped editing my stories before telling them, stopped apologizing for wanting things I hadn't fully figured out yet, stopped shrinking my ambitions into something easier to digest. It wasn't confidence. It was alignment. At work, I volunteered for a project I would have avoided before. Not because I was suddenly fearless, but because I was tired of assuming I didn't belong in rooms I'd never actually been excluded from. Some days went well, some didn't. Both felt survivable. One evening, I ran into an old acquaintance at a coffee shop, someone who knew us, back when us still existed. After a few minutes of polite catching up, they hesitated. "I heard you two split," they said carefully. I nodded. "Yeah, that must have been hard." It had been, but that wasn't the whole truth anymore. "It taught me something early," I said instead. They waited, but I didn't elaborate. Not everything needs an audience. I never heard from him again after that morning at the gym. No surprise messages, no dramatic apologies, no final attempts to rewrite the ending. And that told me everything I needed to know. What we had wasn't something he could fight for without control. Without someone to manage his image, he'd moved on to building another version of himself, one that didn't require accountability. I didn't follow his life from a distance. I didn't check his social media. I didn't ask mutual friends for updates. Closure didn't arrive as a conversation. It arrived as disinterest. On quiet nights, I sometimes thought about the girl I'd been at 24, the one sitting on the bedroom floor, stunned by a word she never expected to hear from someone she loved. I felt tenderness for her now. She hadn't been foolish. She'd been open. And she'd learned something that would shape the rest of her life. That love doesn't ask you to disappear. That admiration without respect is just performance. That the moment someone feels embarrassed by your becoming is the moment you should stop waiting for their approval. Growing up, I realized, wasn't about becoming harder. It was about becoming clearer. And clarity, once you have it, doesn't fade. There's a strange myth people like to tell about youth. That being young means being careless. That it means you don't know yourself yet. That mistakes at that age are inevitable, almost forgivable, because you didn't know better. What no one tells you is that being young also means the lessons arrive sharper. They don't ease you into understanding. They don't cushion the impact. They hit you all at once, and whatever survives is what you carry forward. I used to think strength was something you earned later, after experience, after loss, after you'd been broken enough times to stop feeling things so deeply. Now I know better. Strength doesn't come from not feeling. It comes from feeling everything and still choosing yourself. Leaving him at 24 wasn't brave in the way movies make bravery look. I didn't deliver a speech. I didn't demand closure. I didn't walk away with my head held high and my heart untouched. I left shaking. I left crying. I left unsure of who I'd be, without the version of myself that had tried so hard to fit into someone else's life. But I left, and that mattered more than how composed I looked doing it. Months later, when I tell this story, when people hear about the reunion, the word he used, the silence that followed, they sometimes nod with recognition. I went through something like that, they say, back when I was younger. There's always a pause after that, a look that drifts somewhere else. Not regret exactly, but memory. Because most people don't leave the first time they're diminished. They stay. They try harder. They make themselves smaller and call it compromise. And then, years later, they look back and wish they'd trusted the version of themselves who noticed the warning signs early. I don't tell this story to say I did everything right. I tell it because I did one thing early. I listened. I listened to the way my body reacted when someone I loved spoke about me with embarrassment instead of pride. I listened to the silence that felt safer than explanation. I listened to the part of me that knew disappearing slowly would hurt more than leaving all at once. If there's anything I've learned since then, it's this. The people who truly value you don't need you to prove your worth in public. They don't treat your growth like a liability. They don't require you to dim yourself so they can shine. And if someone ever makes you feel like your presence is something to manage, like a flaw they need to explain away, that's not a phase. That's a truth. You can learn it later, after years of adjusting yourself to fit, or you can learn it early, while you're still becoming. I learned it at 24, not because I was strong, but because I was young enough to leave before I forgot who I was. And that, more than anything, changed the rest of my life. Before we start, I want to say this. If you've ever been told you weren't enough because of what you do for a living, or because your life didn't look impressive from the outside, you're not alone here. This channel is a space for quiet stories, the ones that don't come with shouting or dramatic scenes, just moments that slowly change how you see yourself. If stories like that matter to you, take a second to subscribe to the channel. These videos are for people who listen closely. And if anything in this story feels familiar, like the video so more people who need it can find it, and share your thoughts in the comments. Even if it's just one line. Someone else reading might feel a little less alone because of it. My name is Connie Whitmore. I'm 32 years old. And until a month ago, I believed I was standing on the edge of a life I had carefully built, slowly, honestly, without shortcuts. Not flashy, not impressive to strangers, but solid in the ways that mattered to me. I've been a high school English teacher for 8 years. I teach juniors how to argue with evidence instead of volume. I coach the debate team after school. I run the literary magazine that nobody reads until graduation, when suddenly it matters. I watch students who swear they hate books light up when they realize stories can sound like their own thoughts. I don't make executive money. I make enough. After my master's bump, I pull in around $58,000 a year. I live within my means. I save. I don't chase status symbols. I've never felt small about that, until someone I loved made me feel like it wasn't enough. His name was Ethan Caldwell. We were together for 4 years, engaged for 1. We met at a friend's birthday party, one of those crowded rooftop things where everyone's holding a plastic cup and pretending they're not checking each other's shoes. He was charming, polished, easy to talk to. Worked in pharmaceutical sales, made good money, around $95,000 with bonuses. From the start, he knew exactly what I did. I never pretended to be anything else. For a long time, I thought we were aligned. We talked about the future in that vague, reassuring way couples do when they assume details will sort themselves out. We booked a venue, sent save the dates, opened a dedicated savings account for a house down payment, mostly in my name, because I'm the one who tracks things. It didn't bother me then. The first crack appeared at a dinner party. Ethan's college friend group had this monthly rotation, couples taking turns hosting. The kind of dinners where wine bottles are lined up like trophies, and everyone pretends they're relaxed while quietly competing. That night, one of his friends was talking about his new Tesla Model S Plaid. Another couple had just come back from Aspen. Someone else mentioned a promotion, an equity bump, a corner office. I smiled when appropriate, nodded, asked polite questions. When the conversation turned to us, someone asked about our honeymoon plans. We're thinking about a road trip, I said. National parks. I've always wanted to do that. The silence that followed wasn't long, but it was sharp. Someone laughed. Not cruelly, not kindly either. Roughing it, huh? One of the friends said. Bold choice. More laughter. I felt it then, the subtle shift. Like I'd said something that marked me as other. Ethan laughed too, harder than he needed to. I looked at him, just for a second, waiting for him to soften it, to say something, anything. He didn't. On the drive home, he was quiet. Not tired quiet, not thoughtful quiet, the kind of quiet that feels rehearsed. When we got back to his apartment, he didn't turn on the lights. He sat down on the couch and patted the cushion beside him. We need to talk, he said. I sat. He took a breath like he was about to read from a script. I've been thinking about this for a while, he started, and I don't think I can marry you. The words landed softly, but their weight crushed the air out of my chest. "What?" I asked. Came out calm, too calm. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "You're an incredible person. This isn't about love." That's when I knew. He hesitated, then pushed forward. "You're just a teacher, Connie. My friends' wives are executives, partners, people who are going places." I stared at him. "I need someone who fits the life I want," he continued. "Someone my friends respect." For a moment, I thought I might cry, or yell, or do something dramatic that would justify how cruel the sentence felt. Instead, something unexpected happened. I felt relief. The knot I'd been carrying in my stomach for months, the one I'd blamed on wedding stress, loosened. Suddenly, everything made sense. The comparisons, the jokes, the way he never defended me. I sat there for 30 seconds, just processing. "What about the wedding?" I finally asked. "The deposits? The house fund?" "We'll figure that out later," he said, dismissive. "This is hard for me, too." The house fund. $34,000. Money I'd been saving for 3 years. Every bonus, every tax refund, every maybe next time to vacations and upgrades. The account was in my name. I made every deposit. Ethan had always had a reason not to contribute. Car payments, student loans, work expenses, the designer bag he needed for networking. I looked at him, really looked, and realized I wasn't heartbroken. I was done. "I understand," I said. He blinked. That's it?" "Yes." I reached for the engagement ring and placed it on the coffee table between us. "I don't want this anymore," I said. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I picked up my bag. "Good luck," I added quietly. And then I walked out. I drove home feeling strangely calm, like a fog had lifted and I could finally see the road ahead clearly. The next morning I went to work. My students argued about symbolism in The Great Gatsby. The debate team needed help preparing for a tournament. Life continued, steady, grounding, familiar. That evening, I logged into my bank account. The house fund was still there, $34,000, all in my name, all mine. For the first time since the engagement, I didn't feel like I was falling behind. I felt like I had stepped out of the wrong story just in time. I didn't tell anyone the engagement was over. Not that first week. I went to work the next morning like nothing had happened. Same parking spot, same chipped mug in the faculty lounge, same juniors complaining about having to annotate poetry like it was a personal attack. Routine has a way of holding you upright when everything else tilts. If anyone noticed the absence of a ring on my finger, they didn't say anything. Teachers are good at that, seeing things and letting people decide when they're ready to talk. At night, though, the silence was louder. I lay awake, replaying moments I'd brushed off for years. The comments Ethan made casually, the way he corrected me in front of his friends, the way I always seemed to be explaining my job to people who had already decided it didn't matter. And underneath all of it, there was one steady, grounding thought. I hadn't made a mistake leaving. The house fund sat there quietly, unchanged. $34,000. I logged into the account every few days, not because I needed to, but because seeing it reminded me of something important. Every deposit told a story. Summer school checks, extra tutoring, a bonus I got for taking on curriculum work no one else wanted. Every dollar was proof of discipline, of planning, of believing in a future even when no one else was contributing to it. Ethan never asked how much was in the account. Not really. He liked the idea of it, liked saying we were saving, liked the security of knowing something solid existed without ever having to be the one to build it. I remembered the conversations clearly now. "I'll start contributing once my bonus clears. This month's a little tight. You're just better at saving than I am." I'd told myself partnerships weren't always 50-50. What I hadn't realized was how easily imbalance becomes entitlement. 3 days after I left, Ethan texted me. "Ethan, we should talk about the money." I stared at the message longer than I needed to. Not us, not what happened, the money. I didn't respond. The next message came an hour later. "Ethan, I don't think it's fair for you to just walk away like this." Fair. That word again. On the 4th day, he called. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was tight, controlled, trying to sound reasonable. "Connie, we need to be adults about this. The house fund was for our future. You can't just take it and disappear. Call me." I deleted the voicemail. Not out of spite, out of clarity. The account was in my name, always had been. There was no joint agreement, no shared deposits, no written understanding beyond conversations that conveniently blurred responsibility. I hadn't taken anything. I had simply stopped pretending. By the end of the week, the pressure escalated. Ethan's sister texted me. "Sister, Ethan's really struggling. You blindsided him. Can you at least talk to him? Blindsided. I typed a response. Deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. Instead, I turned my phone face down and opened my laptop. I needed facts, not feelings. I pulled up every bank statement from the past 3 years, highlighted my deposits, saved copies, screenshots, dates, amounts, patterns. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. Because people who feel entitled to your labor rarely stop at asking politely. That Friday afternoon, I got an email from the wedding venue. Subject line: contract clarification. My stomach tightened, not with fear, but recognition. Ethan had reached out to them. They were just checking on the status of the booking. Mentioned there was some confusion about next steps. The contract had both our names on it, but the payment history told a simpler story. I forwarded the email to myself, flagged it, made a note to call them Monday. Then I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I breathed. For the first time since the engagement ended, I wasn't reacting. I was moving. That night, I poured a glass of water, just water, and sat at my kitchen table with a notebook. I made a list, not of grievances, of actions. Secure finances, cancel shared obligations, set boundaries, say nothing unless necessary. It felt almost boring, and that's how I knew it was right. The following Monday, I called the venue. I didn't dramatize, didn't overshare. I paid the deposit, I said calmly. I can provide documentation. The coordinator sighed softly, like she'd heard versions of this before. We'll need to review it with management, she said. But yes, send over your statements. I did. By the end of the call, I felt lighter, not because it was resolved, but because I was no longer pretending I owed anyone access to my future. Ethan texted again that night. Ethan, you're being really cold about this. I read it once. Then I archived the conversation. Cold was what people called you when you stopped negotiating your worth. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vindictive. I was simply done subsidizing a life that didn't respect me. And somewhere between grading essays and tracking refunds, it became clear. This wasn't about money. Money was just the first thing he tried to take when he realized he couldn't take me for granted anymore. The venue called me back 2 days later. I was sitting in my classroom during lunch, half a sandwich on my desk, a stack of essays waiting to be graded. The room still smelled faintly of dry erase markers and teenage impatience. Hi, Connie, the coordinator said, her voice professional but warm. We reviewed your payment records. And? I asked. You're correct. The full deposit came from your card. I closed my eyes briefly, not in relief, more in confirmation. There is one complication, she continued. The contract lists both names. Normally, we require signatures from both parties to cancel. I expected that. What are my options? I asked. She hesitated. If one party refuses to cooperate, the person who paid can dispute the deposit. There's an administrative fee, but the majority would be refunded. How much would I lose? About $1,000? I did the math automatically. $3,500 down, $2,500 back. Not ideal, but clean. Let's proceed, I said. She didn't sound surprised. I'll email you the paperwork. When I hung up, I realized something uncomfortable. I hadn't once felt tempted to ask Ethan for permission. That was new. The photographer was easier. The contract was in my name only. $800. Fully refundable within 30 days. I'm sorry things didn't work out, she said gently over the phone. Thank you, I replied, and meant it. The DJ followed, $400 back, no questions asked. Piece by piece, the wedding dismantled itself, not with drama, but with logistics. I kept a running spreadsheet. Venue, pending refund. Photographer, refunded. DJ, refunded. Each line felt like reclaiming oxygen. Ethan noticed. Of course he did. Ethan, you canceled the photographer without talking to me? I didn't answer. Another message followed. Ethan, this is my wedding too. I stared at the words. Was. That night, he showed up at my apartment. I hadn't told him where I'd moved after leaving his place, but mutual friends had. It wasn't hard to trace. I didn't open the door right away. I stood on the other side, listening to his breathing through the wood. Impatient, controlled, familiar. Connie, he said, can we talk? I opened the door just enough to look at him. He looked irritated more than hurt, like someone who'd lost control of a situation he thought was managed. You're canceling everything without me, he said. That's not how partnerships work. I leaned against the doorframe. This stopped being a partnership when you told me I wasn't good enough to marry, I said calmly. That's not what I said. I met his eyes. It is exactly what you said. He exhaled sharply. You're twisting things. No, I replied. I'm remembering them accurately. His jaw tightened. You're being unreasonable. You're taking money that was meant for both of us. I'm reclaiming money I saved, I said. There's a difference. Silence stretched between us. He shifted tactics. You know people are asking questions, he said. This makes me look bad. That was the moment. Not anger, not sadness. Clarity. I'm not managing your reputation anymore, I said. I'm managing my life. He stared at me like he'd never heard those words before. So that's it? He asked. Yes. He waited for something. An apology. A negotiation. It didn't come. Eventually, he stepped back. Fine, he said. Do whatever you want. I closed the door. A week later, the venue refund hit my account. $9,150. I updated the spreadsheet. Total recovered so far, $3,700. I stared at the number for a moment, then closed the file, because the real recovery wasn't financial. It was internal. I had spent years smoothing things over, explaining, accommodating, making myself smaller so someone else could feel taller. Canceling the wedding alone wasn't lonely. It was honest. And honesty, I was learning, was quieter than performance, but far more powerful. The idea came to me on a Tuesday night. Not in a dramatic, eat, pray, love way. No breakdown, no wine-fueled spiral. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open, bank account on one tab, airline prices on another. The apartment quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I had money. Not reckless money, not prove-a-point money. Just available money. The house fund sat intact. $34,000. The wedding refunds were trickling back in. I hadn't spent a cent of it yet, partly out of habit, partly out of disbelief that for once, nothing was earmarked for someone else. I stared at a photo of Rome on my screen. The Colosseum at golden hour. Stone worn smooth by centuries of people who had lived entire lives before I existed. I'd always wanted to go. Ethan hated the idea of long trips that didn't come with prestige attached. He liked resorts, curated experiences, places you could name drop casually at dinner. Italy had always been my idea. I booked it in one sitting. 2 weeks, Rome, Florence, Venice. Business class flights. Something I'd never even clicked on before because it felt indulgent in a way I'd trained myself to avoid. Hotels I didn't have to justify. Restaurants I'd saved for someday. $8,000. When the confirmation email landed in my inbox, I didn't feel guilty. I felt steady. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. Not my colleagues, not my friends, certainly not Ethan. I packed quietly. Comfortable shoes. A notebook. One dress I liked because I liked it, not because it fit into a certain image. On the plane, I watched the city lights fade below me and realized something unsettling. No one was texting me asking where I was. No one needed me to explain myself. Rome was loud and alive and completely uninterested in my past. I walked until my feet hurt, ate alone without feeling awkward, sat in churches and museums and cafes where no one knew what I did for a living, or cared. I didn't feel lonely. I felt anonymous in the best possible way. On the 4th day, I posted a single photo. The Colosseum, sunlight spilling through the arches. Caption: sometimes the best journeys start when you stop going in the wrong direction. I didn't tag anyone, didn't explain, didn't follow it up. My phone exploded anyway. Messages from mutual friends. Ethan's sister. People who hadn't checked in for months suddenly concerned. Friend, this feels pointed. Sister, are you trying to hurt Ethan? Ethan, this is incredibly immature. I read them all. Then I blocked the thread, ordered another glass of wine, watched the sky darken over Rome. Being just a teacher felt surprisingly luxurious when no one was grading my worth. I stayed offline for the rest of the trip. When I flew home, I was tan, rested, and strangely optimistic, like someone who'd stepped out of a narrow hallway into open air. The first thing I did was laundry. The second was lesson planning. Routine again. Familiar. Grounding. Then the stories started reaching me. Apparently, Ethan had been telling people a different version of events. That I'd blindsided him. That I was intimidated by his success. That I'd walked away from the engagement because I couldn't handle it. His mother called my mother. That conversation didn't go the way she hoped. But the most interesting part wasn't the lies themselves. It was how quickly they unraveled. People started asking questions. Quiet ones, side channel ones. Because the timeline didn't add up. Because money leaves a paper trail. Because my absence was calm, not chaotic. A week after I got back, my phone rang. It was a friend of mine, married to one of Ethan's college friends. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, she said, but he thought you'd fight for him. I closed my eyes. He told everyone you were just taking a break, she continued, that you'd come around. When you posted from Italy, he lost it. I didn't feel smug. I felt tired, because I finally understood something. He hadn't expected me to leave. He'd expected me to negotiate. And that misunderstanding, more than anything else, was what shattered his version of the story. It arrived on a Thursday. Plain white envelope. No return address that meant anything to me. Just my name, typed neatly, like this was routine business. I opened it standing in my kitchen, backpack still slung over one shoulder, shoes half off. The kind of moment that usually comes with bills or PTA flyers. Not this. Formal notice of demand. I read it once, then again. Ethan was seeking the return of shared assets, including $17,000, representing his equitable share of the house fund. Additional claims related to financial contributions made during the relationship. I let out a short laugh before I could stop myself, not because it was funny, because it was absurd. I sat down at the table and read the letter slowly, carefully this time. The language was confident, authoritative, designed to intimidate. It talked about fairness, about expectations, about how long-term relationships implied shared ownership, even without written agreements. What it didn't mention was a single deposit he'd made. Not one. I didn't panic. I didn't call him. I called Mara, a friend from college who now did contract law. We hadn't spoken in months, but she picked up on the second ring. "Tell me everything," she said. I did, calmly, chronologically, no embellishment. She listened, asked a few questions. Then she laughed. "This is nonsense," she said. "The account is solely in your name. You funded it entirely. There's no cohabitation agreement, no written contract, no proof of intent to share ownership." "What about the length of the relationship?" I asked. "Doesn't matter," she said. "Courts don't split savings accounts based on vibes." That got a smile out of me. "And the engagement?" I asked. "You returned the ring," she said, "which, frankly, makes you look even better." I exhaled. "So what now?" "I'll draft a response," she said. "Clear, professional, boring, explaining why his claims have no merit. If he actually wants to sue, he can waste money he doesn't have." "How much do I owe you?" $300, she said. "Friends and family rate. Worth every cent." The response went out the next day. And then, nothing. No follow-up, no escalation, no court filing. Just silence. The bluff had been called. I didn't celebrate, didn't tell anyone. I filed the letter away with my bank statements and moved on. Or at least I tried to, because Ethan wasn't finished. That Saturday morning, I was at my usual coffee shop, grading papers. Same corner table, same oat milk latte, same barista who knew my order and never asked questions. I looked up when the bell over the door chimed, and there he was. Ethan, with his sister. Not a coincidence. He spotted me instantly, straightened his jacket, walked over like this was a planned confrontation, not an ambush. "We need to talk," he said. I didn't stand. "I don't think we do." "You got a lawyer involved?" he asked, voice tight. "Seriously? This is what we've become?" I closed my notebook. "You sent me a lawyer letter demanding $17,000, I said. "What did you expect?" His sister stepped in. "She's just trying to make sure things are fair." I looked at her. "Were we building a life together?" I asked. "Or was I just funding one?" She blinked. Because here was the detail that hadn't made it into his version of the story. "He told me I was just a teacher," I said. "That he needed someone his friends would respect." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. That's exactly what you said," I interrupted. Calm, precise, word for word. His sister looked between us. "You didn't contribute to the house fund," I added. "Not once." Her face changed. "Is that true?" "That's not the point," Ethan snapped. "It kind of is," I said. Silence. Ethan grabbed his sister's arm. "Let's go. She's obviously not going to be reasonable." I met his eyes. "I've been very reasonable," I said. "I'm just not giving you money that was never yours." They left. The barista slid a muffin onto my table without a word. I smiled at her, picked up my pen, went back to grading. Because somewhere along the way, I'd learned this. People don't bring lawyers into things they're confident about. They do it when control is slipping, and they don't know how else to get it back. The school year had a rhythm to it. September always did. New faces, new energy, juniors who pretended they didn't care, seniors who pretended they weren't terrified. The debate team buzzed with first tournament nerves. The literary magazine submissions came in uneven and raw and hopeful. Work anchored me, not as an escape, but as proof that my life hadn't collapsed just because one relationship had. I hadn't planned on dating. I wasn't swearing it off dramatically. I just wasn't looking. The idea of small talk, of explaining myself again, felt exhausting. Then the debate tournament happened. It was a Saturday. Early. Too much coffee. Folding tables lining the gym like an obstacle course of arguments and clipboards. Judges checking in, students pacing, teachers pretending not to hover. I was organizing ballots when someone stepped up beside me. "Excuse me," he said. "Do you know where room C is?" I turned. He was tall, a little rumpled, like he'd come straight from something demanding and hadn't had time to smooth himself out. Not flashy, not polished, just present. "Down the hall, second door on the left," I said. "Thanks," he replied, then paused. "Are you one of the coaches?" "I am." He smiled. "Good. Then I'm in the right place." We didn't talk again until later. During a break between rounds, he ended up next to me in the hallway, both of us leaning against the wall, scrolling our phones like people avoiding eye contact on purpose. "So," he said, "what do you teach?" There it was, the question that usually came with a flicker of judgment. "English," I said, bracing myself. His face lit up. "No way," he said. "That's incredible." I blinked. "It is?" "Absolutely," he said without hesitation. "Those teachers changed my life." No pause, no qualifiers. "No, that's nice layered with pity. Just respect." "I'm Daniel," he added. "I'm here judging when I can. Volunteer thing." "Connie," I said. "Coach, occasional referee." He laughed. We talked for 10 minutes. About books. About how debate teaches kids to think, not just argue. About how exhausting teenagers are in the best way. Only then did he mention his job. "I work at the university hospital," he said casually. "Residency." I nodded. "That sounds intense." He made a face. That's one word for it. He didn't elaborate, didn't posture, didn't make it his identity. When the tournament ended, he hesitated. "Would you like to get coffee sometime?" he asked. No pressure. There was something in his tone that made the answer easy. "Sure," I said. Coffee turned into another coffee. Then dinner. Then walks that lasted longer than planned. On our third date, he asked about my past relationship. I gave him the short version. He said he couldn't marry me because I was just a teacher, I said. Daniel laughed, not mockingly, genuinely incredulous. "I make more money than my attending did at my age," he said. "And I'm miserable half the time." I raised an eyebrow. "You know what success is?" he continued. "Waking up and not dreading your day. You have that. Most people don't." I didn't know what to say, so I kissed him. He kissed me back. It felt easy. No performance. No measuring. No keeping score. A few weeks later, through mutual friends, I heard how things were unraveling on Ethan's side. The couples he'd once compared us to weren't doing so well. The financial analyst never came home. The startup guy got laid off. The marketing executive was having an affair. The dinner parties stopped. The scoreboard vanished. Ethan had started dating again, chasing what he thought he wanted, the kind of person his friends admired. None of it lasted. I didn't feel satisfied by that. I felt free. Because for the first time, I was with someone who didn't ask me to justify my worth. He saw it, and that changed everything. I didn't know Ethan would be there. If I had, I probably still would have gone, but I would have worn different shoes. Something steadier, something grounded. It was a holiday party at a friend's house. Not a close friend of mine, not really. One of those overlapping social circles that linger long after relationships end. I hesitated before saying yes, then decided I wouldn't keep shrinking my world just to avoid running into someone from my past. Daniel offered to come with me. "We don't have to stay long," he said. "We can make an appearance and escape." I smiled. "Deal." He showed up at my place straight from the hospital. Scrubs swapped for jeans and a sweater, his ID badge still clipped to his bag because he'd forgotten to take it off. He apologized for it like it was a flaw. I liked that about him. The house was already loud when we arrived. Music playing too softly to matter, laughter spilling into the hallway, coats piled in a way that suggested no one planned on leaving early. I spotted Ethan almost immediately. He was standing near the kitchen island, drink in hand, posture stiff. He looked good, on paper. Tailored jacket, clean haircut. The version of himself he liked to present to people who mattered. His eyes found me. Then Daniel. I felt the shift before I saw it. Not jealousy exactly, more like recalculation. My friend's wife noticed the pause and stepped in with forced cheer. "Oh, Connie, hi, you made it, and this must be—" "Daniel," he said, extending his hand. "Nice to meet you." Ethan shook it a little too firmly. "And you know Ethan already," she added, too late to stop herself. Daniel glanced between us, polite and unbothered. "I do now." Someone nearby asked the inevitable question. "So what do you do, Daniel?" He shrugged lightly. "I'm a resident. Pediatrics." There it was. I didn't look at Ethan. I didn't need to. I felt it. The way the room recalibrated. The way certain people leaned in, suddenly interested. The way the metrics shifted. That's impressive, someone said. Daniel smiled. Mostly it's exhausting. I felt Ethan's gaze on me then. Sharp, searching. As if he were trying to solve an equation that no longer made sense. Later in the evening, Daniel went to refill his drink. I stayed near the window, watching snow collect along the edge of the porch light. That's when Ethan approached. He seems nice, he said. I didn't respond. You moved on fast, he added. 6 months isn't fast, I replied. It's healthy. He hesitated. I've been thinking about what I said. Maybe I was harsh. I turned to face him. You weren't harsh, I said. You were honest. He frowned. I didn't mean it like, yes, you did, I said calmly. And that's okay. You told me exactly what you valued. I just didn't fit. Daniel returned then, sliding in beside me naturally, his hand finding mine without effort. Ready? He asked. I'm on call in 6 hours, and I'd really like to sleep. I smiled. Yeah. As we grabbed our coats, Ethan watched us, not with anger, with something closer to disbelief. Outside, the air was cold and clean. Daniel exhaled, shoulders dropping. That was your ex, he said. How could you tell? The way he looked at you, Daniel replied, like he was doing math and didn't like the answer. I laughed. As we walked to the car, my car, a used sedan I'd bought years ago and never apologized for, Daniel stopped me. Hey, he said. Yeah? That house fund you mentioned once, he said. You still have it? Most of it. He nodded thoughtfully. My lease is up in a few months. Maybe we could start looking at places together. No pressure. I looked at him, really looked. This man who didn't measure me by titles, who didn't flinch at my choices, who thought I was the impressive one. I'd like that, I said. We drove off into the quiet. Behind us, a chapter closed. In front of us, something steady began. We didn't rush anything. That surprised people. After everything I'd been through, there was an assumption that moving forward meant moving fast, as if stability only counted when it came with milestones you could announce. Daniel and I ignored that. We dated quietly. Weeknight dinners that ended early because one of us had work in the morning. Walks that didn't need destinations. Conversations that didn't feel like interviews. He never asked me to explain my choices. He asked about my students, about what books I loved teaching and which ones bored me. He listened when I talked, not like he was waiting for his turn, but like the details mattered. And slowly, almost without noticing, we started talking about logistics. Not dreams, not fantasies. Life. His lease was ending in a few months. Mine wasn't, but my place was small and temporary in a way I'd never admitted out loud. One evening, we were sitting on my couch, paperwork spread between us, his residency schedule, my school calendar, when the topic came up naturally. We don't have to decide anything now, he said. I just want to be honest about where I'm headed. I nodded. Me too. There was no grand declaration, no pressure, just two adults mapping realities. When we started looking at houses, it didn't feel like a performance. No bragging, no comparisons, no trying to win an imaginary competition. We wanted something modest. 3 bedrooms, a small yard, good schools, not because of resale value, but because of community. When the conversation turned to money, I braced myself out of habit. Daniel noticed. Hey, he said gently, we'll do this fairly. I have more saved, I said automatically. I know, he replied, and I don't want that to matter. I looked at him. It kind of does. He shook his head. Not the way you think. We sat at the kitchen table with calculators and notes, working through numbers like teammates, not adversaries. In the end, he insisted on splitting the down payment evenly. We're partners, he said. That means equal. I didn't argue. Not because I couldn't, but because this time, equality wasn't something I had to fight for. We bought the house 3 months later. Nothing flashy, no announcement post, no champagne photos with oversized keys, just a closing date and a handshake. Moving day was chaos. Daniel's colleagues from the hospital showed up between shifts. My teacher friends arrived with coffee and tools they didn't know how to use. Someone brought pizza. Someone else brought a cooler. There was laughter, sweat, boxes labeled badly. It felt like a community, not a competition. That night, we lay on a mattress on the floor. Furniture delivery delayed, exhausted in the best way. Daniel turned to me. You happy? He asked. I didn't hesitate. Yeah, I said, really happy. Good, he replied. Me too. There was no applause, no scoreboard, just peace. Later, through the grapevine, I heard about Ethan. His sister reached out to me unexpectedly, weeks after the party. She apologized for the coffee shop, for believing his version of events. She said things hadn't gone well for him since. The relationships he chased looked good on paper and collapsed in practice. The life he thought he wanted kept slipping just out of reach. Apparently, he'd struggled the most after seeing me settled. Not because I'd won, but because I hadn't needed to. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt distant. Because success, I'd learned, wasn't about impressing people who were already busy measuring each other. It was about building something quiet and real, with someone who never asked you to be more than you already were. Life didn't change all at once. It settled. Mornings became predictable in the best way. Daniel left early for the hospital most days, careful not to wake me. I stayed behind, grading papers at the kitchen table, sunlight slowly filling the room. There was no sense of performance anymore. No one was keeping score. When people asked about us, I didn't dress it up. "We're doing well," I said, and that was enough. Sometimes the contrast hit me unexpectedly. 4 years with Ethan, and not once did he contribute financially to the future he insisted we were building. He talked about our life as if it were something that arrived automatically, earned by proximity, not effort. With Daniel, everything was intentional. Conversations about money weren't tense. They were practical, equal, honest. No assumptions, no entitlement. That difference mattered more than any title ever could. I heard updates about Ethan through the usual channels, mutual acquaintances, vague mentions at gatherings. He moved to another state, took a job that paid less, but promised better balance, told people he was reevaluating priorities. Maybe he was, or maybe the world he'd built on comparison finally ran out of numbers that made him feel ahead. Either way, I didn't feel curious anymore. When Ethan told me I was just a teacher, he meant it as a limitation, as something small he'd eventually outgrow. But being just a teacher meant I had a life that didn't require translation. It meant I went to work with purpose, came home without resentment, built a future with someone who never asked me to justify my worth. One evening, Daniel leaned against the counter watching me pack lunches for the next day. "You ever think about getting married again?" he asked, casually, not testing, just asking. I smiled. "Only if it looks like this," I said. He nodded. "Good, because love isn't just about staying. It's about respect, shared values, and choosing someone who never mistakes your profession for your value. I'm still just a teacher, and I've never been happier." People like neat endings. They want a clear winner, a downfall, a redemption arc they can point to and say, "See, that's how it's supposed to go." Life doesn't really work that way. What it gives you instead is clarity, if you're willing to sit with it. A year after the engagement ended, someone asked me if I regretted how things happened, if I wished I'd fought harder, explained myself better, tried to be more impressive. I didn't have to think about it. No, I said, because nothing about that relationship failed suddenly. It had been misaligned for a long time. I just hadn't wanted to admit that love without respect slowly turns into negotiation, and negotiation is exhausting. Ethan didn't leave me because I was a teacher. He left because he needed an audience, and I was done performing. Daniel never asked me to be smaller or louder or different. He didn't introduce me with qualifiers. He didn't frame my job like a stepping stone to something better. He saw my life as complete, not provisional. That mattered. We didn't rush into anything dramatic. No social media announcements. No grand gestures designed for outside approval. When he proposed, it was quiet. At home, no witnesses, no spectacle. Just a simple question asked by someone who already knew the answer. I said yes. We're planning a small ceremony. Family, friends, people who actually show up when things aren't shiny. No competition, no hierarchy, no one keeping score. Sometimes I still hear the phrase in my head, "just a teacher," and I smile. Because being just a teacher means I spend my days helping young people find their voices instead of silencing my own. It means I go to work with purpose and come home to peace. It means I built a future carefully, honestly, without needing validation from people who were too busy measuring themselves against others. Ethan wanted someone his friends would respect. I wanted someone who would respect me. We both got exactly what we chose. I'm still just a teacher, and I finally understand how much that's worth. I had a gut feeling my spouse was gearing up to end our marriage, so I quietly safeguarded my wealth. 2 weeks later, he initiated divorce proceedings, only to retract when his scheme unraveled. Hi everyone. Before we dive into today's story, I need your support for real. We've noticed a dip in the channel's momentum, and hitting that subscribe button is one of the easiest ways to help us keep going. It's free, it takes a second, and it tells YouTube, yes, more of this. If these slow burn, twisty, emotional stories have ever kept you company on a late night, I'd love for you to be part of this community. All right, let's get into it. I've been lurking in these forums for years. The kind of person who reads other people's disasters like a cautionary tale and thinks, that could never be me. But life doesn't ask permission before it flips the table. To be clear, I'm not the type who jumps to wild conclusions. I'm not the woman who sees a missed call and starts building conspiracy boards on the kitchen wall. I'm practical. I'm careful. I'm the friend who talks other people down. Which is why it messed with my head when my instincts started screaming and my logic kept whispering, "You're overreacting." My name is Avery Collins. I'm 34. And my boyfriend, technically my husband on paper, even though we still called each other boyfriend and girlfriend out of habit, was Ethan. We'd been together for 6 years, married for 4, and for most of that time we were that couple. The couple people side-eyed at dinners because we had our own little language. Private jokes, stupid faces across the table, that effortless rhythm where you don't even have to ask what the other person wants. Ethan would plan these thoughtful date nights like he was staging a movie scene. Reservations, playlists, a little candle he'd pretend was for ambiance, but really he just liked watching me smile. And I'd do the small things back. His favorite takeout after a brutal week, a surprise coffee on Monday mornings, the exact socks he liked folded on top of the laundry so he'd actually put them away. It felt natural, like we'd cracked the code. So when things shifted, it didn't come with fireworks. It came like fog. About 6 months ago, the change started. Subtle enough that if you weren't paying attention, you'd miss it. But once you notice fog, you can't unsee how everything looks. Softer, farther away, less real. The first thing was his phone. Ethan used to leave it everywhere. On the counter, on the couch, face up on the dining table while he showered. We had that lazy kind of trust where if a notification popped up, neither of us flinched. Then one week, his phone became attached to him. Bathroom, phone in pocket. Taking out the trash, phone in hand. Even doing dishes, he'd prop it against a cup like it was a co-host in our kitchen. I teased him the way you do when you're trying to keep things light. "What, are you running a covert operation now?" I laughed, bumping his shoulder. He laughed too quickly. "Work's been texting nonstop," he said. "I'm just trying to stay on top of things." Fair enough. Until a few days later, he added a passcode. That shouldn't be a big deal, I know. People have passcodes. People have boundaries. But Ethan had never cared before. Not once. And the weird part wasn't the code itself. It was how he did it. Quick. Secretive. Like he didn't want me to see the pattern his thumb made on the screen. When I asked, casually, like it didn't matter, he shrugged. "Cyber threats," he said. "You know how everything gets hacked now." He didn't meet my eyes when he said it. Still, I didn't push. Because I didn't want to be that woman. The paranoid one. The suspicious one. The one who turns normal life into an interrogation. But it didn't stop at the passcode. He started taking calls in other rooms. Not discreetly either. His phone would buzz and he'd do this thing, this tiny pause, like he was calculating whether I'd notice. Then he'd smile too bright and say, "Oh, I'll just take this quick," and disappear into the bedroom or step out to the balcony like our living room suddenly had bad reception. When I asked who it was, he'd brush it off. Just a work friend. Just a guy from my team. Just stuff. And then came the face down thing. I didn't even know that was a red flag until it happened over and over. Dinner table, coffee table, couch cushion. His phone would land face down like it couldn't risk a single word lighting up where I might see it. One night I reached toward the salt shaker and my hand went near his phone by accident. He slid it away. Fast. Too fast for someone who wasn't hiding anything. He didn't even realize what he'd done until he saw my face. Then he laughed, again too quickly, and said, "Sorry, reflex." I nodded. But something inside me went cold. Because reflexes come from fear or guilt. And then the emotional distance started. Our conversations used to be easy. Now they felt like chores we completed so the silence wouldn't swallow us whole. If I mentioned the future, our anniversary trip, maybe saving for a new car, Ethan would give a vague, "Yeah, we'll figure it out." And then he'd change the subject so cleanly, it felt like watching someone close a door in your face without slamming it. It all crystallized one afternoon when he told me he was meeting a friend for coffee. I was out running errands near that area, and I thought it would be sweet to surprise him. Like a reset, like proof we still had that spark. So I pulled into the parking lot across from the cafe, and I froze. Ethan wasn't inside. He was outside, pacing the sidewalk with his phone pressed to his ear, jaw tight, eyes hard. He didn't look like a man meeting a friend. He looked like a man finalizing something. I stayed in my car. My hands were on the steering wheel, but I couldn't feel them. I didn't mean to overhear. I didn't lean out the window. I didn't creep closer. But the wind carried pieces of his voice. Nearly set. Fresh start soon. And something else. Something that made my stomach drop, because he sounded excited. Not happy. Not relieved. Excited like someone who can taste the finish line. When he got home later, I kept my tone light. How was coffee? He didn't even blink. Oh, good, he said easily. My friend was venting about her relationship. Same old stuff. It was too smooth. Too rehearsed, like he'd practiced it in the mirror on the drive back. I stared at him for one heartbeat longer than normal. Then he did something that felt like the real reason he'd been building all this secrecy. He brought up money. We should consolidate our finances, he said, like he was suggesting a new Netflix show. Just organize everything in one place. Accounts, passwords, documents, for emergencies. I blinked. What kind of emergencies? I asked, keeping my voice casual, but my pulse started climbing. He shrugged. You know, in case something happens, if one of us needs to make a big move fast, it's just smart. His reasoning sounded logical, but his delivery felt practiced, too perfect, like he'd been coached on which words would sound responsible instead of suspicious. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I said, makes sense. But inside, my instincts were screaming so loud I could barely hear my own thoughts. Why now? Why this sudden push to streamline money when we'd always been relaxed? Separate accounts, shared expenses, no drama. That night, I lay in bed next to him, staring at the ceiling, while he breathed like a man with nothing to hide. Phone secrecy. The cafe call. The distance. The money questions. It wasn't one big smoking gun. It was the way all the little things formed a pattern, a shape. And that shape looks like an exit. I told myself I'd wait. I told myself to be calm. But deep down, I already knew. Something was coming. And if I didn't prepare, I would be the last person to find out, after it was too late. The worst part about suspicion isn't the fear. It's the silence you have to live in while you decide whether you're crazy. For the next few days after Ethan's "let's consolidate everything" speech, I kept doing what women like me always do when something feels off. I tried to normalize it. I tried to be the calm one. I tried to talk myself out of my own instincts. Because if you accuse the person you love of plotting behind your back, and you're wrong, you don't just apologize. You fracture something. So I smiled. I made dinner. I laughed at the right moments. I kissed him goodnight like my stomach wasn't tied in knots. But every time his phone buzzed, my eyes flicked toward it before I could stop myself. Every time he got up and stepped into another room to take a quick call, my chest tightened like a hand closing around it. And every time he came back with that neutral expression, like nothing had happened, I felt that fog again, that distance. It wasn't just the phone anymore. It was him. Ethan had this habit when he was happy. He'd fill the room. He'd talk with his hands. He'd lean into me when I spoke, like every word mattered. Now he felt elsewhere, like his body was here, but his mind was already packing boxes. One night, I tried to pull us back to what we were. You know, I said, flipping through vacation ideas on my phone. Our anniversary is coming up. We could finally do that weekend cabin thing. No work, just us. He didn't even look up from the TV. Yeah, he said, flat and quick. We'll figure it out. Then he changed the channel. Just like that. It was such a small moment. No yelling, no argument. But it landed in my stomach like a stone. Because when someone is still invested, they don't respond to your future like it's an inconvenience. They respond like it matters. The next day, he brought up the finances again. Not in a dramatic way. In a casual way, like he was trying to make it feel normal. We were in the kitchen. I was slicing fruit. The knife hit the cutting board in a steady rhythm, and he was leaning against the counter, scrolling on his phone like he was half listening to the world. Hey, he said, now looking up. Have you thought about sorting out the bank stuff? Like, do you know where all our account info is? Passwords, statements, that kind of thing? I set the knife down slowly. My heartbeat didn't spike. It dropped. Because now it wasn't a suggestion. It was persistence. I wiped my hands on a paper towel, turned to him, and kept my voice calm on purpose. Steady, controlled, the way you talk when you're forcing yourself not to sound emotional. Okay, I said, what's going on? He paused. The smallest pause. And I watched his thumb stop moving on his phone. You've been weirdly fixated on our finances lately, I continued. Is there something we need to talk about? He looked up like I'd startled him, then laughed, again, that quick laugh that never reached his eyes. No, he said immediately. No, nothing's wrong. I think it's smart. Smart for what? I asked. He shrugged, but it wasn't a casual shrug. It was defensive, tight. I don't know. Life, emergencies. It's not a big deal, Avery, I swear. There it was. The word Avery. He only used my full name when he was trying to sound reasonable, when he was trying to guide a conversation somewhere without making it obvious. I stared at him for one more beat, letting the silence press against us. Then I nodded. Okay, I said softly. And I dropped it. Not because I believed him, because I wanted to see what he'd do next. That night, while he showered, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the bathroom door like I could hear the truth through the steam. I hated what I was becoming. I hated that I was counting red flags instead of counting blessings. But my instincts weren't quiet anymore. They were relentless. The next day, while Ethan was at work, I logged into our joint account. I didn't do it with adrenaline, like some spy movie. I did it with a sick feeling in my throat, like I was about to confirm something I didn't want to know. At first, it looked normal. Rent, utilities, groceries, the usual. Then I noticed the transfers. Not one big chunk. Small ones. A few hundred here, a few hundred there. Amounts small enough that most people wouldn't notice unless they were looking. But I was looking, and when I pulled up the history for the last month, I saw the pattern. Every few days. Same kind of amounts. Always going out. Always to accounts I didn't recognize. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. My mind tried to rush in with explanations. Maybe he was paying something off. Maybe he was helping someone. Maybe he was planning a surprise. But my stomach didn't buy any of those stories. Because if it was innocent, he would have said something. I took a screenshot, then another. Then I opened a separate folder on my laptop and saved them all there, my hands moving automatically while my thoughts spun. I wanted to confront him. I wanted to slam the laptop shut and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But that advice from years of reading other people's stories and forums, it echoed in my head. If you confront too soon, you give them time to cover their tracks. So I didn't confront him. I did something that felt safer. I called a friend from college, someone I trusted, someone who didn't gossip, someone who never got dramatic for entertainment. He was a lawyer now, and when he picked up, I forced myself to sound normal. Hey, I said, can I run something by you? Just hypothetically. He didn't laugh. He didn't brush me off. He just listened. I told him about the phone secrecy, the cafe, the money questions, the transfers. I downplayed it at first, because that's what you do when you're afraid of being told you're paranoid. I'm not saying something's definitely up, I said quickly. Something feels wrong. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said carefully, I'm not saying he's planning something, but you're not crazy for wanting to protect yourself. My throat tightened. Protect myself how? I asked. He exhaled. Look, people can be in love and still get ugly when money is involved, he said. And if your gut is telling you to pay attention, you should. Better safe than sorry. He didn't tell me to spy. He didn't tell me to do anything illegal. He outlined basic legal steps, ways to secure what was mine, ways to make sure I wasn't blindsided if things went south. As he spoke, I felt two things battling inside me. Guilt, because I still wanted to believe Ethan was good, and resolve, because the transfers didn't lie. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet living room with the TV off and the curtains half drawn, listening to the hum of the fridge like it was the only stable thing in the house. This wasn't just about money. This was about the life we built. I kept flashing back to our wedding night. His hands in mine, his voice promising we were a team. And now I was preparing like we were opponents. That night, when Ethan came home, he kissed my cheek and asked what I wanted for dinner. His face was calm. His eyes were steady. He looked like a man with nothing to hide. And that was the part that terrified me most. Because either I was losing my mind, or he was hiding it perfectly. I waited until he fell asleep. Then I opened my laptop. My hands weren't shaking like a movie scene. They were steady, almost numb, like my body had decided for me. I pulled up everything. Accounts, investments, property paperwork, anything with my name attached to it. Each document I opened felt like another step away from the woman who believed love was enough. And another step toward the woman who understood love doesn't stop someone from trying to take what's yours. I wasn't trying to hurt him. I was trying to survive him. If my instincts were right, I made a list. What could be moved? What couldn't? How fast it could happen? How discreetly? I paused, staring at the cursor blinking on the screen like a heartbeat. Then I did something I didn't think I'd ever do in my life. I called my mom. It was late. She answered on the second ring, her voice thick with sleep. Baby, what's wrong? I swallowed. I need you to hold some things for me, I said, keeping it vague. It's not bad, just a precaution. There was a pause. The kind of pause where a mother hears the truth you're trying not to say. Are you okay? She asked softly. Yeah, I lied. I just want to be careful. She didn't push. She didn't demand details. She just said, "Of course, whatever you need." When I hung up, a wave of relief hit me so hard it almost felt like grief. Because needing your mother like that as an adult means something in your life has cracked. And I could feel the crack spreading. By the time Ethan rolled over in his sleep and mumbled something I couldn't understand, my list was complete. The plan was forming. And deep down I knew, whatever Ethan was preparing to do, I couldn't afford to be the last person to know. There's a strange clarity that comes when you accept one hard truth. No one is going to protect you better than you will. The night I decided to act didn't feel dramatic. There was no rain hitting the windows, no trembling hands hovering over the keyboard like a movie scene. It felt quiet. Too quiet. Like the calm you get right before something irreversible happens. I sat at the dining table with my laptop open, the glow of the screen cutting through the dim apartment. Ethan was out, working late, he'd said, which lately meant nothing and everything at the same time. I stared at the first account on my list. This was the money I'd built before him. Savings from my 20s. Investments I'd researched myself. The safety net I was proud of because it meant I didn't need anyone to survive. And yet here I was, wondering if the man I loved was positioning himself to take it. My lawyer friend's words echoed in my head. You don't need proof to protect yourself. You need timing. So I started with the cleanest moves. The ones that were legal, quiet, defensible. I transferred what I could, slowly, methodically, never in one big chunk. Enough movement to secure myself, but not enough to trigger alerts or questions. I left the joint account untouched except for normal expenses. Rent still paid, groceries still bought. I wasn't trying to disappear the money. I was trying to make sure it couldn't disappear from me. As each confirmation email popped up, a dull ache settled in my chest. Not fear, not excitement, grief. Because every transfer felt like I was admitting something I wasn't ready to say out loud. That the marriage I believed in might already be over, and I was the only one still pretending otherwise. Then came the house. The paperwork sat in a neat folder I'd barely opened in years because I trusted that I didn't need to. Trust makes you lazy in the best way. It convinces you danger is always external, never sleeping beside you. I reviewed every page, every clause, every signature. And when I made the call to initiate the change, putting it under a structure tied to my mother, I had to pause halfway through the conversation just to breathe. "This is legal, right?" I asked quietly, even though I already knew the answer. "Yes," the professional on the other end said calmly. "It's been done many times before." That should have comforted me. Instead, it made me sad, because it meant my situation wasn't unique. People had stood where I was standing, felt what I was feeling, loved someone, and still needed armor. By the time I closed my laptop, my reflection in the dark screen looked different, older, sharper, like someone who just crossed an invisible line. I wasn't the woman who assumed good intentions anymore. I was the woman who prepared for bad outcomes. When Ethan came home later that night, I was already in bed. He slid in beside me, kissed my temple, and asked if I wanted to watch something tomorrow. "Sure," I said, my voice steady. He wrapped an arm around me, relaxed, comfortable, unaware. And the weight of that nearly crushed me, because part of me wanted to shake him awake and scream, "Why are you doing this?" And another part of me whispered, "Because he thinks you won't see it coming." The next few days were an exercise in acting. I laughed when I was supposed to. I asked about his work. I responded like nothing inside me was rearranging itself into something colder and stronger. Ethan, meanwhile, seemed lighter, not affectionate exactly, but relieved, like something he'd been worried about had resolved itself. And that made my skin crawl. Because people don't relax unless they think the risk has passed. What stood out most wasn't what he said. It was what he stopped saying. No more talk about finances. No more questions about documents or passwords. The topic vanished completely. At first, I wondered if he'd dropped it because I'd pushed back. Maybe he thought it wasn't worth the effort. But then I noticed the glances. Quick looks when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The way he'd open his mouth like he was about to say something, then stop. It felt like he was waiting. Waiting for me to bring it up. Waiting for permission. Waiting for a sign that I was still the same woman who trusted without question. I didn't give him one. That silence became my shield. Every night, after he fell asleep, I checked everything again. Accounts, documents, dates, signatures. I made sure nothing could be undone on a technicality. I confirmed with my mom that she had every file, every backup. "This is all just precaution," I told her again. "I know," she said gently, "and I'm proud of you." That was when it hit me how serious this had become. Mothers don't say they're proud when things are normal. 2 weeks passed like that. 2 weeks of eerie normalcy. Ethan cooked dinner once. He joked. He asked about my day. And for half a second, I wondered if I'd imagined everything. If I'd built a fortress against a threat that didn't exist. Then, on a random Friday evening, he asked me to sit down. He turned off the TV. He folded his hands. And before he even spoke, my stomach dropped. Because some instincts don't fade. They wait. And I knew, before he said a single word, that whatever I'd done in the shadows had just saved me from what was coming next. We need to talk. Those 4 words didn't hit me like a slap. They hit me like confirmation. Ethan sat across from me on the couch, posture straight, hands folded together the way people do when they've rehearsed something and don't want to forget their lines. The TV was off. The apartment felt unnaturally quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. I nodded slowly, as if he'd just said something ordinary. Okay, I said. He took a breath that sounded measured, deliberate. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he began. About us, about my life, about what I need. There it was. The language of detachment. The preamble that lets someone frame their exit as personal growth instead of abandonment. I think, he continued, eyes fixed somewhere just past my shoulder, that I need space. I feel like I've lost myself in this marriage. Marriage. Interesting how the word suddenly mattered. I stayed silent. I let him fill the space. People always tell you more when you don't interrupt. It's not that you did anything wrong, he said quickly, then contradicted himself without realizing it. It's just, I've given up a lot, and I don't think you ever really appreciated that. That one landed, not because it was true, but because of how confidently he said it. I deserve better, he added, voice cool, controlled, like he was stating a fact, not a feeling. I felt something in me harden, not anger, clarity. He wasn't sad. He wasn't conflicted. He wasn't even particularly guilty. He was resolved, and that told me everything I needed to know. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't ask him to explain what sacrifices he meant, because I already knew the answer would be vague. People who rewrite history don't like specifics. Instead, I nodded. If that's what you want, I said evenly, we'll figure out next steps. He looked at me then, really looked at me, for the first time that night. There was a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He'd expected resistance, tears, bargaining, fear. He didn't get any of it. That night, he packed a bag and left to clear his head. By Monday morning, the papers arrived. Not a conversation, not a discussion, legal documents. I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee that went cold in my hands as I read through them. It wasn't just a divorce filing. It was a demand. Half the house, half my savings, my investments, the car, and a vague request for spousal support that made no sense given his income. It wasn't grief that washed over me. It was disbelief. Because this wasn't someone leaving a relationship. This was someone trying to cash it out. And suddenly, every strange moment from the last 6 months snapped into place. The secrecy, the money questions, the friend who'd been helping him see clearly. This wasn't impulsive. It was strategic. I called my lawyer that afternoon. He didn't sound surprised. Do not respond emotionally, he said. Let me handle this. So I did. And that was when the real waiting began. The kind where you don't sleep properly. Where every unknown number makes your pulse spike. Where you replay conversations and realize how carefully you were being positioned. A few days later, Ethan texted me. I hope you understand this isn't personal. I stared at the message for a long time before locking my phone and setting it face down on the table. Because it was personal. It was just also calculated. And the person he thought he was out maneuvering, she was already 3 steps ahead. Once the papers were filed, Ethan stopped pretending this was about feelings. Everything became transactional. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't check in. He didn't circle back with late-night nostalgia or second thoughts. What he did do was push. Through lawyers. Through timelines. Through demands dressed up as fair. That's when I knew, without a doubt, that someone else had been whispering in his ear. Because people don't suddenly learn how to squeeze a settlement out of nowhere. They're taught. The first clue came from social media. I hadn't blocked him, and he hadn't blocked me. We were still living in that strange in-between, where everything was technically polite but emotionally radioactive. I scrolled through his tagged photos, old events, work functions, group shots I'd never looked at twice before. That's when I noticed her. Trisha. She wasn't front and center. She didn't leave heart emojis or flirty captions. She was subtle. A like here. A, you're killing it there. A comment on a post that didn't really need one. Enough to blend in. Enough to be invisible, unless you were already looking. I clicked her profile. Public. Marketing job. Mid-30s. Stylish but not flashy. the kind of woman who knows how to look harmless while planting ideas. And then I saw it, a photo she'd posted weeks earlier, standing outside a cafe. The cafe, the same one where I'd seen Ethan pacing the sidewalk, voice low, talking about a fresh start. My stomach tightened. I didn't have proof. But I had pattern recognition. And patterns don't lie. I reached out to a mutual friend, someone who'd known Ethan long before me. I kept my tone light, careful not to sound accusatory. "Hey," I said, "have you talked to Ethan lately? He mentioned a friend who's been giving him advice." There was a pause on the line. Too long. "I don't really want to get involved," she said quickly. "I don't know anything." Then she ended the call. I tried another friend. Same approach, same outcome. Evasiveness, defensiveness, like they'd all been prepped to say the same thing. Finally, I called someone I trusted less, but who valued honesty more than loyalty. She hesitated. Then she sighed. "There's a woman at his work," she said quietly. "Trisha. They've been spending a lot of time together. I don't know exactly what's going on, but she's been very involved." "Involved how?" I asked. "Helping him think through the divorce," she said. "What he deserves, what he should ask for." There it was. Not an affair, at least not yet. Something colder. Coaching. I didn't confront him. I didn't text. I didn't demand answers. I did something smarter. That Saturday, I parked a block away from his new apartment. I told myself I was just confirming what I already knew, that I wasn't stalking, that I wasn't spiraling. I waited. A few hours later, the door opened. Ethan stepped out, and behind him, Trisha. They didn't hold hands. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. They walked close enough that their shoulders brushed. They leaned toward each other when they spoke. Comfortable, familiar, like teammates. They got into her car and drove off. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. Because now I understood everything. The distance hadn't been confusion. It had been preparation. The money questions hadn't been curiosity. They'd been reconnaissance. And the divorce? It wasn't an ending. It was supposed to be a launch. For him, for her, funded by me. He thought I was going to panic, to plead, to negotiate from fear. He had no idea that by the time he filed, I had already closed every door he planned to walk through. The mediation room was colder than it needed to be. Not temperature-wise, emotionally. That kind of sterile cold where everything smells like recycled air and bad decisions, where people sit too straight and speak too carefully because every word might cost them money. Ethan arrived 10 minutes early. He looked confident. Not smug, worse than that. Calm, centered, like a man who believed the outcome had already been decided and he was just there to collect it. Trisha wasn't there, of course. She didn't need to be. This was the part where she stayed invisible. His lawyer sat beside him with a binder thick enough to double as a weapon. He placed it on the table with a soft thud, the sound of preparation. My lawyer nodded politely. I said nothing. When the mediator signaled to begin, Ethan's lawyer jumped right in. He listed the demands like they were reasonable, even generous. Half the house, half my savings, my investment accounts, the car, and support payments to maintain a standard of living. I watched Ethan while his lawyer spoke. He didn't look at me. He stared at the table, nodding occasionally, jaw set. This wasn't emotional for him. It was procedural. When his lawyer finished, the mediator turned to us. "My client has something we'd like everyone to review before we continue," my lawyer said calmly. He slid a slim stack of papers across the table. Not thick, not dramatic, just precise. Ethan's lawyer picked them up first. I watched his expression change in stages. Confusion, calculation, then something like irritation. "What's this?" he asked, flipping through. "These documents show the transfer of all major assets into a legal trust," my lawyer said evenly, "established under my client's mother's name." Ethan looked up sharply. "What?" he snapped. "The transfers were completed weeks before the divorce filing," my lawyer continued. "They are legal, notarized, and irrevocable." The room went quiet. Not awkward quiet. Dangerous quiet. Ethan's lawyer shot him a look. "You didn't mention this," he said flatly. Ethan grabbed the papers, scanning them faster now, flipping pages like if he moved quickly enough, the reality would change. "This isn't real," he muttered. "This can't be real." Then he turned to me, and for the first time since this started, the mask cracked. His eyes weren't cold anymore. They were furious. "You planned this," he hissed. "You knew I was filing and you set this up to ruin me." I didn't respond, because there was nothing to explain. My lawyer answered for me. "These actions were taken as a precaution," he said. "No laws were broken. No assets were concealed. Everything was done transparently and within the bounds of the law." Ethan's lawyer leaned back in his chair, lips pressed thin. This changes things, he said. Yes, it did. The mediator cleared her throat. We'll need to pause, she said carefully. Counsel will need time to review these documents. Ethan slammed the papers onto the table. This is unbelievable, he said, voice tight. I can't believe you'd do this to me. I finally looked at him, really looked at him. This is what you were doing to me, I said quietly. The meeting ended shortly after that. Outside, in the hallway, Ethan grabbed my arm. Not hard enough to leave a mark, but hard enough to make a point. This isn't over, he said under his breath. You'll regret this. I met his eyes. My only regret, I said, is trusting you. And for the first time since all of this began, he looked scared. The fallout didn't happen all at once. It leaked. At first it came as calls. Missed calls, to be exact. My phone lighting up with Ethan's name at odd hours. Early morning. Late night. In between meetings. Like he was throwing darts at the clock, hoping one of them would land when my defenses were down. I didn't answer. The first voicemail was almost gentle. Hey, can we talk? He said, voice low, measured. I think things got misunderstood. The second one came an hour later. I'm not trying to fight you. I just want us to be reasonable. By the end of the day, the tone shifted. You didn't have to do this, he snapped in the next message. You blindsided me. I deleted them without responding. My lawyer had been clear. Silence was my strongest position. Anything I said could be twisted, reframed, or used as leverage. Ethan wasn't used to silence. By day 2, the messages swung wildly, like he was throwing emotions at me, hoping one would stick. One voicemail sounded tight, controlled, his voice rough around the edges. Not tears, not weakness, just frustration straining against pride. I supported you, he said. I sacrificed for you, and this is how you repay me? Another came hours later, sharper. You think you're some kind of genius now? All you've done is prove how selfish you really are. Then, late that night, one final message. This didn't have to be ugly. I stared at my phone after that one. Because it hadn't been ugly until he realized he wasn't getting what he came for. When calls and voicemails stopped working, he switched strategies. He went public. Not publicly in a social media meltdown way, but quietly, carefully, the way people do when they're trying to control a narrative. Friends started texting me, not accusing me outright. Just probing. Hey, I heard things are rough. I didn't know Ethan was feeling so unappreciated. I guess sometimes people do drastic things when they feel cornered. Cornered. As if he were the victim. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I didn't counter-message with screenshots or timelines. I let him talk. Because the problem with stories built on half-truths is that they collapse under basic questions. And sure enough, they did. People asked him why the divorce papers were so aggressive if this was just about space. Why the demands were so precise if it wasn't planned. Why the finances mattered so much if he only wanted freedom. The answers didn't line up, so he pivoted. The story changed again. Now it was a misunderstanding, then a wake-up call, then, unbelievably, a test. He just needed to see if Avery would fight for the marriage, someone told me, repeating his words like they made sense. A test, filed with lawyers, with demands, with deadlines. People didn't buy it, not for long. The more he talked, the worse it sounded. And then, right when the pressure was starting to close in on him, my phone buzzed with a message that changed everything. It wasn't from Ethan. It was from Tom. We weren't close. Friendly, yes. Trusted, maybe, but not someone who inserted himself into drama. I have something you need to see, the text read. Can we talk? My chest tightened, not with fear, but anticipation. Because something told me this wasn't another opinion. It was evidence. We met 2 days later. And when he slid his phone across the table, I understood why Ethan's confidence had evaporated so quickly. Some lies don't just unravel. They detonate. Tom didn't say anything at first. He just slid his phone across the table and watched my face instead of the screen, like he was bracing for impact. What am I looking at? I asked, even though my chest had already tightened. Read, he said quietly. All of it. I scrolled, and with every swipe, the room felt colder. They were messages between Ethan and Trisha. Not vague, not suggestive, not open to interpretation. Strategic. Calculated. Cruel in the way people get when they stop seeing someone as a person and start seeing them as a resource. One message from Ethan read, "She's hesitating. I think she suspects something." Trisha replied, "Then you need to push the narrative harder. Make her feel guilty. Remind her what you gave up. She owes you." My throat went dry. Another message, days later. "Once the settlement's done, we'll have what we need. I just need her to sign." Trisha's response came fast. "Stay strong. Don't back down. You deserve half and more. We'll start fresh once you've got the money. I stared at the screen, my hands perfectly still. This wasn't emotional venting. This wasn't two people leaning on each other during a breakup. This was a playbook. Every strange moment, every rehearsed line, every financial question. All of it had been engineered. Tom exhaled slowly. I didn't want to believe it at first, he said. But Mark, sorry, a guy I know, overheard Trisha bragging about how she was helping Ethan secure his future. It didn't take long to realize what that meant. And you got these how? I asked, my voice distant even to my own ears. She sent them, Tom said, to someone she trusted, someone who started feeling sick about it. They didn't want blood on their hands. I nodded. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I felt emptied out, like whatever part of me still wanted to believe there was a misunderstanding had finally been excised. Do you know what hurts the most? I asked quietly. Tom shook his head. It's not that he wanted to leave, I said. It's that he planned to destroy me on the way out and thought I wouldn't notice. Tom looked down. I'm sorry, he said. You didn't deserve this. I thanked him, handed the phone back, and sat there for a long moment after he left, just breathing. Then I did something I hadn't done once since this started. I let the truth move. I didn't blast it online. I didn't post screenshots with captions. I didn't need to. I shared them privately, carefully, with people who mattered. With people who had been confused, neutral, or quietly skeptical. The effect was immediate. The same friends who had told me to be reasonable stopped messaging. The ones who'd repeated Ethan's test excuse went quiet. And the people who'd stayed on the fence finally picked a side. His. Just not the one he wanted. Word spread faster than I expected. Because when people see proof, they don't need persuasion. They connect the dots themselves. Ethan's lawyer contacted mine within days. The tone had changed. No more demands, no more ultimatums, no more confidence. Just logistics. The claims were withdrawn. The aggressive language softened. The fight was over before it ever made it to court. And Trisha? She vanished. Her social media went dark. Her name stopped coming up. Her presence evaporated the moment it was clear there was no money waiting on the other side. The other hall. I wouldn't be surprised if she'd believed her own fantasy, right up until it collapsed. Ethan tried to reach me again after that. The messages weren't angry anymore. They weren't threatening. They were desperate. Can we just talk? I made mistakes. You don't have to forgive me. I just need you to hear me out. I didn't respond, because there was nothing left to hear. Some betrayals don't end in screaming matches or dramatic confrontations. They end in silence, the kind that settles when the truth has finally done its work. Tom didn't say anything at first. He just slid his phone across the table and watched my face instead of the screen, like he was bracing for impact. What am I looking at? I asked, even though my chest had already tightened. Read, he said quietly. All of it. I scrolled, and with every swipe, the room felt colder. They were messages between Ethan and Trisha. Not vague, not suggestive, not open to interpretation. Strategic. Calculated. Cruel in the way people get when they stop seeing someone as a person and start seeing them as a resource. One message from Ethan read, "She's hesitating. I think she suspects something." Trisha replied, "Then you need to push the narrative harder. Make her feel guilty. Remind her what you gave up. She owes you." My throat went dry. Another message, days later. "Once the settlement's done, we'll have what we need. I just need her to sign." Trisha's response came fast. "Stay strong. Don't back down. You deserve half and more. We'll start fresh once you've got the money." I stared at the screen, my hands perfectly still. This wasn't emotional venting. This wasn't two people leaning on each other during a breakup. This was a playbook. Every strange moment, every rehearsed line, every financial question. All of it had been engineered. Tom exhaled slowly. I didn't want to believe it at first, he said. But Mark, sorry, a guy I know, overheard Trisha bragging about how she was helping Ethan secure his future. It didn't take long to realize what that meant. And you got these how? I asked, my voice distant even to my own ears. She sent them, Tom said, to someone she trusted. Someone who started feeling sick about it. They didn't want blood on their hands. I nodded. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I felt emptied out, like whatever part of me still wanted to believe there was a misunderstanding had finally been excised. Do you know what hurts the most? I asked quietly. Tom shook his head. It's not that he wanted to leave, I said. It's that he planned to destroy me on the way out and thought I wouldn't notice. Tom looked down. I'm sorry, he said. You didn't deserve this. I thanked him, handed the phone back, and sat there for a long moment after he left, just breathing. Then I did something I hadn't done once since this started. I let the truth move. I didn't blast it online. I didn't post screenshots with captions. I didn't need to. I shared them privately, carefully, with people who mattered, with people who had been confused, neutral, or quietly skeptical. The effect was immediate. The same friends who'd told me to be reasonable stopped messaging. The ones who'd repeated Ethan's test excuse went quiet. And the people who'd stayed on the fence finally picked a side. His. Just not the one he wanted. Word spread faster than I expected. Because when people see proof, they don't need persuasion. They connect the dots themselves. Ethan's lawyer contacted mine within days. The tone had changed. No more demands, no more ultimatums, no more confidence. Just logistics. The claims were withdrawn. The aggressive language softened. The fight was over before it ever made it to court. And Trisha? She vanished. Her social media went dark. Her name stopped coming up. Her presence evaporated the moment it was clear there was no money waiting on the other side. I wouldn't be surprised if she'd believed her own fantasy, right up until it collapsed. Ethan tried to reach me again after that. The messages weren't angry anymore. They weren't threatening. They were desperate. Can we just talk? I made mistakes. You don't have to forgive me. I just need you to hear me out. I didn't respond, because there was nothing left to hear. Some betrayals don't end in screaming matches or dramatic confrontations. They end in silence, the kind that settles when the truth has finally